Welcome, everyone. This is your friend, the DN What If, here with another exciting fanfiction. Today, we're diving into the story of what if Deku went back in time with one for all and all for one. If you enjoy this video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more fanfiction content just like this. Now, let's get started with the fanfic. Above him, the sky is clear and the sun is shining. Izuku stared at the sky for what seemed hours, taking deep breaths. It was a beautiful day. It almost seemed like the world knew what he had done and it decided to give him this as a sign that a new brighter chapter for the world had started. Izuku was exhausted, his body feeling like a bag of rocks after the fight, and really he kind of deserved it. More than half of the fight was him going feral with one for all and its other quirks. But he had to do it. If he didn't, if he stopped and thinked for even a second, he would have died. A laugh came from beside him, from the other person left in the destroyed battlefield that used to be a city. All for one, or rather, Hisoshi Midoriya, let out a tired laugh as he laid on the ground next to Izuku, his son. "What's so funny?" Izuku asked, giving his father, the world's greatest villain, a glare. "I'm just thinking of the irony of this whole thing. The quirk that I gave my brother, the only one that could defeat me, passed down to my only child who has defeated me. Quite the poetic ending, don't you think, Izuku?" Hisoshi said with a smile. Izuku just rolled his eyes. The man next to him might have been just as tired as Izuku, but that wasn't the reason he was on the floor. The real reason was that he was dying. "You are dying and you are using your last moments to talk to your sworn enemy, seriously?" Izuku asked, annoyed that his father couldn't die any faster. "You aren't my sworn enemy. Really, that title only goes to All Might. That annoying blonde was a thorn in my side far longer than any other user, so he gained that honor," AFO said with the same calmness one would have when talking with a friend. "Am I your sworn enemy, son?" Hisoshi asked. "Don't call me that," Izuku said. Getting called son by the man who had tried to kill him less than an hour ago made a chill go down his back. "But, no, you aren't. That one goes to Shigaraki. You are more like my fated rival or something like that." "Fated hair. Guess you are right. If you didn't have the quirk you wouldn't have had to fight me, and I guess Shigaraki did annoy you a lot more than I did." Another laugh came from the man, his suit drenched in their blood as he slowly felt his heart begin to slow down. He didn't have long. If he focused the fleet-eye healing quirks he could probably hold on for a few more minutes, but his death was inevitable. He looked back to the young man with green hair. "What day is it?" The question surprised Izuku. Why did he want to know the date? Izuku was too tired to just say no, and really he also wondered what day it was too. Maybe he could make it a celebration, the day the greatest evil was defeated. Yeah, that sounded nice. He started thinking back. The war started close to a year ago, but the final battle started about 2 weeks ago and their fight lasted almost 2 days, both of them too stubborn to just lay down and die, so that would make today, it's July 15th. Izuku was really seeing the irony of the situation. "Your birthday, correct?" his father said. "Remembered?" Izuku was genuinely surprised. The man that had been missing his entire life, the one he had always assumed never cared about him, remembered his birthday. "Why are you so surprised?" "You are my son, of course I would remember," AFO answered, and he had the guts to sound offended. "Well, you never called, visited, or even sent any presents, so it's not hard to assume that you didn't care about me and Mom," Izuku shot back. Silence fell between them. For a moment he thought that the old man had finally died, but it seemed like still had a few more minutes of torture to go through. "Izuku, I always cared about you and your mother." Izuku blinked in surprise hearing what his father said. "The reason I left was because I left to fight All Might. I wanted to end it all there, not just the annoying lineage my brother had made but also my life as a villain. After that I just wanted to come back home and have a normal life. Sadly, things didn't go as planned." Izuku stayed silent in shock. He couldn't tell if he was lying or not. The sadness in his voice sounded genuine. "That blonde bestiary won and I lost my face. I couldn't go back to you like that, so I ran away. I feared that if I went back I could be putting you and your mother in danger, and that brought out my hate for that man. Because of what he did to me I couldn't go back to you and your mother. I had lost everything I held dear to me again, but I never stopped caring about the both of you." Izuku gulped. He never thought about this, but his father's words caused a bit of curiosity to bloom inside of him. If things had gone in your favor, what was the plan? Fo didn't hesitate in answering. I would have taken one for all back, killed All Might and fake my own death, make the fight look like a tie, go back to you and your mother and just rest. Those last words were said with the exhaustion that only a man that has lived for thousands of years could understand. Silence once again fell between the two, Izuku taking in the words, the confession his father gave him and the many mixed feelings that came with it. He hated this man. He was the cause of so many deaths, including the people he cared about, his friends, teachers, all of them died just to give him the chance to fight, so many died for just one simple win. But after hearing this, deep inside of him, he felt happy to hear that his father cared about him, that not being with them affected him just as much as it did to them. He felt angry that it was now that he was saying all of this, in their last moments together, that he didn't try harder to reach them. He felt sad that his father was dying. This one was the most confusing. He had felt sad, sometimes depressed when his friends died, but he couldn't understand why he felt sad for a man he barely knew. He didn't want to cry, but he was too damn tired to stop the tears. Son, I'm sorry for making this probably your worst birthday ever, Fo said. It was getting harder to breathe. He wasn't sure if it was because of his dying body or the guilt of his actions finally catching up to him. He wanted to do something, anything to make this day a little better for Izuku, because that's what parents do. They try to make their kids feel better, but how could he? Maybe that. Izuku, if you could, would you want to see your friends again? He asked. What kind of question is that? Izuku asked back, confused as to where this was going. Just humor your old man in his last moments, would you? Izuku rolled his eyes, but he couldn't help the sad smile that formed in his face, remembering the fun times he had with his friends as he closed his eyes, back when everything was fine, when they were just students and not child soldiers. Yeah, I would love to see them again. Izuku couldn't see it, but from the tips of the dying man's fingers, a small black and red tentacle formed and slowly made its way towards the green-haired boy, too deep in his own memories to notice the danger. Son, Hisoshi said, making Izuku open his eyes just enough to see the tentacle pierce his chest, stabbing him right in the heart. Soon after came a wave of electricity that ran through his entire body. He screamed as excruciating pain clouded his own mind, his body spasming, his blood boiling him from the inside, and yet somehow, he heard his father's voice loud and clear, "Happy birthday." Then, his world went dark. Izuku's body felt sore. Not as heavy as before, but he is tired and there's a strange ringing in his ear. He moves feeling the cold asphalt beneath him, the soft material from his suit not there anymore and instead replaced by something a lot more loose. When the ringing finally stops, letting the sounds from the world come back to him, he focuses on the voices around him. So happy to see you again, little brother, isn't this the best? All the family is here. Back off, you old yesterday. Why won't you die? Come on, Shimura. That's no way to treat your guest. What happened to your manners? Can we please try to focus on the situation at hand and then try to kill him later? Izuku recognized the voices and the names, so that meant that he must be inside One for All again. He must have passed out or something. But why was Nana screaming? Guys, the little guy is waking up. Izuku was finally able to sit up, the soreness in his body slowly disappearing, and he opens his eyes only to wince when the light hits them. Wait, light? Izuku takes a moment to let his eyes focus, only to discover that he isn't inside One for All unless they changed it and made it look like a dirty alley. He looked around, his eyes falling on the ghostly figures of the past users around him. They seemed to freeze when they realized that he was looking at them and not through them. But there was someone sticking out, a man with white curly hair. He didn't recognize them, and the situation only confused him more since they had their arm around first, almost as if they were family. Things clicked into place. All for One, their fight, the war, his mistake. In a panic, Izuku quickly stood up in a fighting stance and activated full cowl at 50%, but instead of feeling his body lighter thanks to the boost, instead his body screamed at him in pain as his muscles almost feel like they would tear to pieces and that his bones could shatter if he took a step. What? Izuku said, surprising himself even more when his voice didn't come out with the usual deep and gruff voice he had gotten used to. Instead, his voice was much higher and softer, more like the one of a teenager than an adult. That's when he finally looks at himself, only to not find his hero suit but instead see a middle school uniform on him. the ground seemed closer too. He passed a hand through his hair only to realize that his ponytail wasn't there anymore. He had pulled his hair into one since he had been too busy to get it cut. This also made him look at his own hands and see that they weren't littered in scars and they were much smaller than normal. The only thing he could recognize from his outfit were his signature red shoes on his feet. He looked around at the ghostly figures waiting for them to do something, but they just stood still like they were invisible. What happened? He asked, making them snap and look at each other. Nana was the first to react as she looked at him with a nervous smile. "Kid, can you see us?" she asked. Izuku raised a brow at her question. "Of course I can see you, why wouldn't I?" The OFA users looked at each other for a moment only to look back at the two white-haired people here, first glaring at the taller man. First was glaring at all for one, Hisoshi, his father. "What is he doing here?" Izuku asked, looking at Hisoshi with a glare of confusion and anger. "You wound me, son. Is it wrong for a father to want to spend time with his kid?" he said with a smile on his face which only helped in annoying Izuku further. "Tells us what you did, you BSC. Where are we and why does Izuku look like that?" Nana asked, but anyone could hear the anger in her words, glaring at AFO, who was still smiling and holding First, who kept trying his best to try and get out of his grasp but found that he was too weak to push their arm off him. "All I did was give my son his birthday gift and my apology gift too," he answered, waving his hand in the air like nothing of this was a big deal. Izuku tuned out when Nana started to swear at his father again only to look at himself again. He recognized the uniform. It was from Aldera, his old middle school he was in before going to UA. As he looked at his clothes he noticed just how much of a mess he was. A few parts were torn like someone had slashed at him with a knife and some places it even looked burned. He recognized the smell, burned sugar. Bakugo. The last time he had seen him he had stayed back to take on an entire pack of Nomas from reaching him and the other survivors they had tried to rescue. In one final attempt he decided to blow himself up along with all the other monsters. He had gone out with a bang and honored his hero name, Ground Zero. Izuku came back to the present when he felt something in his pocket vibrate. He pulled it out to see his old phone, the one he had before it broke and Mai made one for him. It was weird holding it, feeling that it was heavier than Mai's design. He turned it on and his eyes widened. His eyes focused on the date. He watched the clock change and he bit the inside of his cheek hard enough to make sure he wasn't dreaming. 2 years, he muttered, catching everyone's attention. "It's 2 years before I met All Might," Izuku said, looking wide-eyed at his father. Above him, the sky is clear and the sun is shining. Izuku could only stare in shock at the ghostly figures in front of him. 2 years. He had been sent back in time 2 years before he met All Might. 2 years before he got into UA. 2 years before he got One for All. "What the hell did you do?" Nana asked, her focus back on Hisoshi as he just smiled. "Like I said, it's my birthday gift to my son," he answered, only confusing the others and making Nana angrier. But how? Is this an illusion or a dream? What did you do to me?" Izuku asked, waiting for a proper answer from the culprit. "Son, I know you are smarter than this. You've already figured out the answer, haven't you? You just don't want to accept it," his father said, finally letting go of his little brother, who quickly moved away from him. He was right, he knew, but the answer was just too imposable. But how? There have never been any records of any quirk that could mess with time, even more one that could send someone 4 years into the past. He was right, he didn't want to accept it because it was just impossible. A quirk like that would never go unnoticed by either the villains or the heroes. Well, long story short, this quirk appeared in the early ages. The news spread like wildfire. A quirk with that kind of ability would never go unnoticed, so I acted quickly. I stole the quirk from the young boy and then spread the lie that the quirk had been nothing more than a lie, and just like that, no more time-traveling quirk, AFO explained. Again, like it was no big matter. Sadly, the downside is that the one who has it can't use it on themselves. I was able to send chairs back to an hour. But if I couldn't use it on myself to fix a mistake I made, then I saw it as useless, so I stopped using it and then forgot I even had it until the end of our fight. Everyone just looked in silent shock at the man who confessed to have the power to manipulate time and call it useless. "So, what happened to Izuku? Is he just gone?" Daigoro asked. Hisoshi brought a hand to his chin as he thought of an answer. A chill ran through Izuku's back as he realized that he used to do that same pose a lot. "It's hard to say, I never dare try messing with that part of the quirk since I didn't want to cause some kind of time anomaly, but if I had to guess, we have two possibilities. Hisoshi raised two fingers as everyone watched him. The first possibility is that when I sent Izuku back, I created a parallel timeline to ours, meaning that our original timeline is still progressing just without him. The second option is that I sent back Izuku in the same timeline, but thanks to the different actions that have already been made, the future we know has been erased and a new one has been made. Izuku felt as something started to form in him, a warm feeling that he had forgotten about. So, are they? Izuku couldn't finish his sentence as his hands trembled. His father just nodded. Tears wasted no time to start pouring down his face, not from sadness but from happiness. His friends were alive, he could see them again. Wet laughs came spilling out from his throat as relief washed through his body. He could save them. He had another chance to stop their sacrifices. His knees finally gave up on him as he crumbled to the ground once again, feeling as if the weight of the world had finally been taken off his shoulders. Now that I think about it, didn't you mention something about an apology gift? Fourth asked, letting Izuku catch his breath. Ah. Yes, I had almost forgotten about it. But I don't need to explain that one, you can easily tell yourselves, can't you? The familiar dark smile appeared on Hisoshi's face, causing everyone to freeze. Izuku, who had managed to stand back up again, looked at himself once more. He looked normal as being in your younger body gets, but aside from that nothing looks off, so maybe… Izuku closed his eyes, focusing on One for All. He felt it react as the energy flowed through his body just like his own blood did, but something felt off. He focused again, trying to figure out what it was. It almost felt as if something had latched itself with Izuku opened his eyes in shock as he fell to the ground again, holding his head in his hands as it throbbed with pain because of the information flooding to it. Energy had shot through him all at once, too different, too strong. He looked at his father, who had a smile still on his face. He looked pleased with himself. First marched forward and grabbed his brother's shirt and brought his face down to his level, a murderous glint in his eyes. Why does he have your quirk? First demanded. Hisoshi just laughed. I knew that killing the people who he cared about would be something unforgivable, so I started thinking on something to try and make up for it. I couldn't bring them back to life, and I doubt he would have liked no new versions of them as his underlings, so I thought that if in our fight he proved to be worthy, I would give him my own power, just like you, brother. First pushed him back, anger clear in his face, and screamed, I am not like you. Hisoshi laughed, the smile never disappearing. How I have missed those tantrums of yours. I sure am glad that we are all back together. The mood did not fit the smile he wore, the hatred pouring out of Nana and first, how every other user tried to stay away from him, and even Izuku, whose emotions have yet to settle after the roller coaster that he went through. Izuku Midoriya looked back up to his father, who now had curiosity gleaming in his eyes. Now that you know the power you hold and the new chance that you have been given, what is it that you will do? Hisoshi waited for an answer. His little brother's quirk was strong by itself, but now that it had his own, added with all of the quirks he had become a one-man army. He was in a whole other level that no one would ever be able to reach but him. This kind of power would allow someone to not only conquer a nation but the entire world itself. And he wondered, what would the child of the greatest evil, the successor of the symbol of peace, do with it? Izuku looked at his trembling hand. He could feel them now, the thousands of quirks that now lived inside of him. Their power could be his with only a thought. He closed his fist as a flame inside of him roared to life. He looked once more at his father, determination clear in his eyes. He had a mission and he was going to accomplish it, and all this man did was give him the tools necessary for it. Izuku stood up once more, this time his legs not shaking in the slightest as he looked forward. I'm going to save my friends and stop you for good. All for One could only let out a laugh at his son's answer. What was it that Keiju used to call him? He was too stubborn for his own good. Then I hope you give me a good show. Midoriya smiled and took his first steps into his second try at his life. Behind him, the other users behind him every step of the way, and his father walking beside him looking at the world around them. But first things first, he needed a plan of action. All right, we are doing this, right? Third asked. Izuku had now been standing for 5 minutes in front of the door to his and his mother's place. He didn't know why, but he was really nervous to see his mother again. How long was the last time he visited her? A lot of stuff had happened in his life, from staying at the UA dorms, training, and getting dragged into a war had really taken most of his time, so he had no chance to go and see his mother again. In a strange surprise, Izuku wasn't the only one nervous about opening the door. During the walk, his father had tried multiple times to strike up conversation, even if the best he got was a lot of angry answers from Nana, but the closer they got, the quieter he became, until finally, he stood quietly looking at the door. Izuku took a deep breath in and unlocked the door with his keys. The small cozy apartment immediately brought back memories to Izuku, the times him and his mother sat together at the table and talked about their day, when they would cook meals together or when she would listen to him rambling about the latest hero news. Izuku, welcome back. How was your crying? Izuku, did something happen? Only until his mother pointed it out when she came to greet him did he realize that she was right. Tears had somehow already formed in his eyes and even began rolling down his face without him even noticing. The refreshing atmosphere, the feeling of warmth from seeing his mother, it all was enough to finally break down the wall he tried to put up for so long. He tried wiping away the tears, but more just kept falling down, but it didn't matter to him. He smiled at his mother. Sorry, Mom. Everything is fine, I'm just really happy to see you. These words made Inko smile, and making a few small tears form in her eyes, she hugged her son and Izuku gladly accepted the warm hug. The other users smiled at the scene but decided to give the mother and son privacy by leaving to another room. First turned back to look at his older brother, who stayed in his place looking at his own family. In his face rested a small tired smile, but the look in his eyes was a faraway one, the same look of someone remembering an event of a long time ago. But what called his attention was the trembling hand beside him. He looked like he wanted to move but couldn't bring himself to do it. He turned around and left, his own hands slightly shaking. By the time the mother and son duo had finally stopped crying, more than a few tears had been shed on each other's clothes, but they easily went back to their usual routine. Izuku helping with their meal and surprising his mother. Since the last time he helped, he still needed her guidance, but it almost looked like he had been doing this for his entire life. Izuku could only smile at the compliment as he looked at the pot. The smell bringing memories of the times he cooked meals with his friends. A nice warm meal with your loved ones is more than enough to fill your stomach and refill your spirits. The dinner was like any other family would have. Questions like, how was your day? Was there something good in the news? Questions like these were thrown around, but even so, for Izuku, who spent his days fighting, for him who watched both friends and teacher fall in front of him, this was a moment that was a special treasure for him. When Izuku got to his room, the other users were already waiting for him. He cringed a little when he saw just how much All Might memorabilia there was. Alright, so what are you going to do? Asked Nana as she sat on his bed. Izuku raised a hand to his chin as he started to think. As much as he would like to just go to the League's hideout and beat their butts into next Monday, with his body in the state it was in and with the new variable of all for one thrown into the mix, it would be too dangerous to try it. So the first thing he should do is, I need to get back to how I was before. Right now I don't even think I can use full cowl without crippling myself, so the best place to start would be with my training. Izuku had to accept that his body right now was as good as a wet noodle. If I may ask, why not just use some of the strengthening quirks you now have to make your body suitable to use one for all? It would make things much more faster, his father said while looking at an empty space in the wall. All the All Might stuff made him really uncomfortable and angry. Izuku had thought about that idea, but it might be a good idea to get a quick start, but it would do us more harm in the future. I need to get my body used to this power again, and if I used quirks right now my training would probably not give the same results as it did before. They might even be worse. It was a high risk to try it, and high risks is not something Izuku wants right now, so he needed to take the safe route even if it was slower. Well, might as well. But after that, what are you going to do? By checking your memories I can see that it only took you a few months to clean it. Are you going to use the remaining time to just train? Asked his father. Izuku just shook his head. Training for 2 years could be a good idea, but for this it would just be stupid since he would have a lot more freedom in UA than he does now, so it would be better to give it his all then, but for now he has a plan. I hate to say it, but I'm going to take a page out of Shigaraki's book. Izuku sat down, grabbed one of his empty notebooks and a pencil and began to write. The best way to look at this would be as a video game with different kinds of quests. The main and most important quest would be defeating the living AFO. The second one would be to beat Shigaraki since he is the successor. The third one would be to stop Overhaul because of his quirk erasing bullets. those would be our main quests, but we also have a few side quests. They're not important, but they would make things easier down the line. We need to beat the League before they become too strong. I have to get my friend's trust back, and we have to save Izuku. Finished the other users deep in thought as they thought of their own plans. Well, we can leave any kind of fights out right now. Like you said, you are in no condition to fight and you won't meet your friends in 2 more years, so that's a no in everything, Second says, making everyone look at Izuku. Well, not really. It would be foolish to try and go into a war with no kind of information on your enemies, and I still remember the information we dug up on the League when we went to war in the future. Izuku changes to another page and begins writing again. Right now, more than half of the League is missing, with only Shigaraki and Kurogiri. Most of them start to join after the Stain incident, and I did think about it. I can't fight them, but maybe there is another way to weaken them. All of the members are people which society and heroes failed to help, but if I'm able to convince them to come into our side, we might have an advantage. Izuku wrote down the different names of the League's members. Shigaraki is definitely a no. Kurogiri is a maybe, but I have no idea how to bring back his memories. Twice and Spinner are also off the list. Daby's entire existence is to make his father pay, even if it means his life, so making him would be impossible. He's literally too angry to die, and most of the others are horrible villains that enjoy murder like a pastime, leaving only one option. Izuku had crossed out the other's name and drew a source around the last one, Himiko Toga. Right now, she is in middle school and is the same age as me. In a few years she will go in a rampage and start killing her classmates, but if I play my cards right, I might be able to not only stop her but convince her to get on our side. His father clapped. Quite a genius plan. That girl Toga was an important piece in a lot of key fights, and after her quirk evolved she became a formidable adversary to all of you, so taking her away from the League is a big blow to their strength. Izuku felt his stomach turn when he got praise from that man. He is both happy that someone likes his plan, but he really wants it to be literally anyone else. Well, I have to admit, that's good, but it doesn't seem like you are done, Third said, giving Izuku a smile. The users saw the familiar glint in his eyes. That look in his eyes meant that Izuku was determined and nothing would be stopping him. Is it that obvious? Well, I do have a plan for getting my friend's trust back. I know of one who I could bet you right now is praying for a hero to come and save him. Izuku smiled as the memories started to come back. You know, I've told you about my childhood, so how about you tell me about yours? Izuku asked. He and his friend sat alone in front of a campfire. It was their turn to keep watch as the others slept. Their friend let out a tired laugh. Well, I guess that's only fair. Their friend passed their hand through their messy hair as they took a deep breath. My childhood wasn't the best. At the beginning I had a good family, but when my quirk came in things changed. My parents were afraid of me and they worried how I could affect how their own friends saw them, so they gave me away, left me in an orphanage to take care by myself. The kids there called me names, bullied me, hurt me, all because of a thing I couldn't even control. They let their gaze fall to the floor. Then I was finally adopted. I had a small hope that things would be better, that I would have someone that cared for me, but all of those expectations were stomped out soon enough. Those BSs treated me like their personal SLV, took out their anger on me when something went wrong. They looked at their clenched fists, their knuckles turning white and anger brewing in their eyes, until it all disappeared, leaving a smile under their tired eyes, their hands falling to their lap. I spent every night praying that one day a hero, someone could come and save me, to get me out of that dark place I was trapped in. They looked up at the night sky illuminated by stars, a soft smile on their face. And you know what, Izuku, even if it took longer than I expected, I think you were the answer to those prayers. In another part of town, a young boy with a head of wild purple hair looked up at the sky with bags under his eyes and bruises covering his skin as their small and thin form trembled. Shinsu took in a shaky breath of air as small tears began to form in his eyes and let out a whisper as he looked at the stars. Please, anyone. I can't believe I forgot about this. Izuku now stood in front of a place he thought he would never come back to. His old school, Aldera. I'm surprised you forgot about it. Shouldn't this have been one of your main concerns at this age? Third asked. Izuku couldn't say anything back since he knew he was right. He had been too busy looking at the big picture, trying too hard to make a plan for the future, that he forgot about the present. So, what's the plan? First asked, looking at him. Meanwhile, Nana and his father were giving glares to the other kids that walked by. Some snickered at him, others looked at him with disgust. He sighed. He needed to remind himself that he wasn't due last user of One for All. but just Deku, the quirkless loser. Now, a plan sounded nice, but he had forgotten about this, so he had nothing to go off on, so his best option was to just take a deep breath and try to fit in. Izuku began walking into the school, trying to ignore the whispers and laughs. Other users quickly followed after him. The only one who stayed at the entrance of the school was Hisoshi. He looked in surprise at how easily his son, the one who took him, the greatest villain, down, put on a mask of a frail and scared child with such ease. He had a vague idea of what his son had gone through since he had gotten pieces of his memories when he gave him his quirk, but since the transition was forced, he didn't have the ability to just see his memories like the other vestiges, but with this, the laughs, the whispers, the looks, he could easily figure it all out. In his time away from them, Inko regularly called him. Sometimes he answered and others he couldn't. It depended on his schedule of stealing quirks and plotting All Might's demise. One day, Inko had called him. He was still resting from his fight with All Might, but he still wanted to hear her voice, so he let her go to voicemail since he could barely use his vocal cords. She told him about how her day went, asked how his job was, how her relationship with her friends was, but through it all he heard as her voice shaked until she finally spoke of him, Izuku. The news were not good. Their son was quirkless and they were both in pieces. He knew about Izuku's dream of being a hero even if it pained him. He could never say no to his bright smile when he talked about helping others. She broke down into sobs as she poured her little heart out to an answering machine, and all he could do was listen. That had been the only call in which she talked about that, but he could clearly hear the stress in her voice. But even with that burden on her, she always gave it her best for their son. Now that he looked at how his life went with that curse, he couldn't help but feel guilty. He may have had one of the strongest quirks that have existed, he may have lived for more than a century, but even with all of that, he was still of first generation. His genes were those of a first generation, so if he ever were to have children, the chances of them being quirkless were astronomically higher than any other in this day and age. So for some reason, even if he knew that he couldn't have done anything, he couldn't help but feel guilty since he had already ruined his child's life from the start. Izuku kept walking around the school as slowly the layout of it came back to his mind. He tried walking without catching much attention, but it was hard since the other kids kept going out of their way to trip him or call him names. He had already been tripped twice in the way to his classroom. "These kids are completely rotten," Fourth said, looking at the kids laughing at him as he picked up his things from the floor. It's okay, Izuku thought. Thankfully he could talk to them in his head, or else people would definitely think of him as insane, which was not something he needed added to the list. "I'm used to it." "That's the problem, kid. You shouldn't be," Nana said as she walked next to him, but he froze once he saw the door to his classroom, the one he spent 4 years being tortured. But there was one thing that made him walk in. And those were the red eyes that immediately centered on him. His childhood friend, his best teammate and his bully, Bakugo Katsuki. To be completely honest, Izuku would be in tears from seeing his best friend once again after seeing him die, but he was a little busy by the pain of being kicked to the ground by that same person. "Well, look who came today, little nerd dude." Bakugo stood in front of him looking down at him with a wicked smile on his face as behind him the other students in the classroom laughed. "It seems like yesterday's Lee-sun was not enough for you, so how about we give you another one?" His hand lit up with light as sparks began to fly like little fireworks. Izuku still wanted to cry and he couldn't help the small tears forming. Don't get him wrong. These were happy tears, but the situation really helped to hide their meaning. Everyone stopped when the teacher walked in and looked at the students. When he looked at Izuku, instead of tired they just looked annoyed, and they only let out a sigh as they put their papers on their desk. "Izuku, please don't annoy Bakugo so early in the morning," the teacher said, placing the entire fault on him. Slowly the students got to their seats, including Bakugo, who gave Izuku one last look which quickly gave the message that this would continue. Izuku got to his own seat and got his notebook. No one ever paid attention to him, and the notebook incident wouldn't happen until a few more years, so he decided to bring his newest notebook. He had called it Notes for the Future, so that it could be passed on as one of his hero analysis ones, but in this one all he had been writing was his plan from his past memories. "I can't believe the teacher just ignored you like that. Isn't their job supposed to help their students?" his father said with anger and confusion as he glared at the teacher. Fourth scoffed. "That would be the case, but with Izuku having the label of quirkless, even the teachers think of him as worthless, and with the strongest kid in the class hating his guts, the other students have no other choice but side with him and ignore him or join in." Izuku frowned. It was true that most of the other kids ignored it when he was beaten down or joined in when they had the chance, but they were just scared. They were scared of being targeted if they were kind to him, so they chose the safe option. Izuku focused back into his notebook where his notes were. They were divided into two, the section based around Shinsu and the other one based around Toga. He had been thinking about the best way to approach both of them, and he found that the best way to approach the blonde would be when she left school, and for the hypnotist, that one had become a little more complicated, but if he played his cards right, he should be able to gain his trust quickly. Looking up information on Toga's school was less than legal since he needed to hack into various different websites to find information on what school she was in. He wasn't entirely proud of having hacking skills since he didn't want to go against someone's privacy, but he convinced himself with this being for the greater good. He had discovered that she left a little later than he did, but the walk he would need to do between his school and hers was still long, meaning that he would need to leave as soon as possible. Shinsu would end up growing up with the idea that his quirk was evil, and thus he hated the idea of people with much stronger quirks, and the years it took for someone to help him created deeply rooted trust issues and a darker look on heroes, so a good start would be to make him understand that his own power could be used for good and try to get him a new house, preferably with Eraserhead and present MIC, but the how ended up looking a bit illegal since he needed to make him see that quirks don't mean everything and that there are people who care, so he would need to take up the mantle of vigilantism again. He hadn't thought about it since the time he ran away from UA. Midoriya. Izuku snapped back to the present as the teacher called his name. His teacher looked excited for some reason. Since you seem so uninterested in the class, how about you tell me the answer to this question? Izuku looked at the chalkboard and was surprised because the question looked a little too advanced for the level of a middle schooler. What is the equivalent of the following logarithmic function in exponential form? 4 log 381 foot. Izuku blinked a few seconds. He may look like a normal child, he shouldn't know the answer to this. But the one thing they didn't expect was that the Izuku from the future was actually an incredible analyst and had years of advantage on his class when it came to his studies, and it only took him a few seconds before he blurted out the answer. It's 81.3. The excitement in his teacher's face fell as they looked back between Izuku, the chalkboard, and the book which they pulled the question out of, only to give up with an angry look. Correct. The teacher then erased the question and continued with the class. Izuku just shrugged that off since the teacher didn't call on him again for the rest of the class. The rest of the day came and went before he knew it, and he was ready to leave and get his first step of his plan started, but someone had a few different ideas. Where the hell do you think you are going in such a hurry? Bakugo and his followers blocked the exit of the classroom as he planned to continue where he left off. I bet you are just trying to run away like a little beach. Izuku froze in place since he couldn't really think of what to do in this situation. His exit was blocked by two other kids, a girl who could control her hair and a boy who could make his arms into stone. If he was older, he could have easily dodged them, but in his current state, even if he managed to pass one, the other one would easily catch him, but he would also need to get past Bakugo, who could not only catch him but cut his path with his explosions. Izuku was brought out of his own head by a loud bang and the smell of burned sugar, before he realized Bakugo had placed his hand on his chest and made a small explosion which was still strong enough to burn his clothes and burn his chest, the strength of the explosion pushing him to the ground. He was stunned for a moment as he tried to breathe, but quickly he noticed that something was wrong. The pain was quickly fading away faster than normal, and his own body felt like it was charged with electricity, almost like when he uses One for All. Izuku closed his eyes and faked being in pain and raised his hands to his chest to not let his bullies see the now fading scar. Instead he began to focus on his quirk as he tried to figure out why it had activated on its own. Izuku opened his eyes to find himself in the familiar void of One for All, but he took a step back at the sight in front of him. Right in front of him, a strange small ball was exuding massive amounts of energy, almost looking like a massive bonfire. Deep down he recognized this to be the core of One for All, but he wasn't using it, so why was it active? He then turned his attention to the sky, which gave him an even more suppering sight. In the place where an empty void of darkness should be, it was now illuminated by thousands of stars of different colors, all shining down at him, but for some reason he also felt the sensation that they were looking at him, a beautiful and confusing sight for him. He also saw that the energy that the core was releasing was actually being absorbed by a few of the stars. More specifically, the ones that were green. They scattered the energy almost like black holes would and shined brighter than the others. Izuku flinched and clutched his head as information rushed into his head. These stars were the quirks that All for One had. The green ones were healing quirks. The ones active right now were some that activated when the user was hurt, but one of them would take the user's stamina to heal them. Another would use what the user ate as fuel to heal them, but he didn't tired nor hungry. My oh my, this is quite the surprising turn of events. The voice of his father came from behind him. Izuku turned around to see both his father and first, should he call him uncle? Looking at the same scene he saw, it seems like our quirks work quite well together, don't you think, brother? First scoffed, not even giving the man a glance, and instead talked to Izuku. If you're confused, it seems like the quirks that he brought that would usually take something from their user are instead taking the energy they need from the core, meaning that you somehow bypass their requirements. Indeed, and the more energy you give them, the stronger the effects. That means a lot of possibilities for you. His father then took on a pout as he crossed his arms. But I'm so jealous. Do you know how many stamina-related quirks I stole so I didn't pass out from the first punch I took? Don't know and don't care, First answered, getting an annoyed look from his older brother. This changes a lot of things, but we'll have to talk about it later. For now, just get back out there and let's get the plan on the road. First waved his hand and the void disappeared as it pushed Izuku back into reality. He snapped back only to see the classroom empty. Bakugo and his goons must have left at some point, leaving him alone. He looked down at his chest and saw that there wasn't even a scratch from the explosion. He quickly stood up and grabbed his things as he ran out the classroom. He would love to look more into this, but First was right, he needed to start the plan. And he needed to hurry because the clock was already running. Okay, this should be a good place, Izuku panted as he looked around the park he had run to. After investigating on Toga, he found this park, which was close to her school and many of the students went to visit. Hopefully he would be lucky and he could catch her before she left for her house. The sun was at its peak and he had ran all the way here, so he moved to stand under the shadow of one of the trees. He looked around and saw parents, young kids and various students, all of them wearing a similar uniform to his, the only differences being how instead of black theirs was a white dress shirt and a light blue blazer with the emblem of their school on their arm. But amongst all of them, there was no sign of the blonde girl. He knew that she looked different, but she was nowhere to be seen. Maybe he had been too late and she had already. Saito? Izuku felt a shiver run down his spine as he recognized the voice. He turned faster than he intended, surprising the short blonde girl behind him. He had already seen her picture, but seeing her in person somehow made it seem more real just how different she was from the killer that he knew. She was much shorter than before. Her familiar messy buns were gone, leaving her straight blonde hair to reach her shoulders. She wore a white dress shirt under a black vest and the same light blue blazer as her classmates. The only thing that told him it was Toga was her golden yellow-colored eyes and thin slits. Freckles, she softly muttered as she looked at him until she finally snapped out of it with a small blush. Sorry, I thought you were someone from my class. It's just that both of you have fluffy hair, but he doesn't have freckles, and in the shadows I thought your hair was black like his, and I dash. Toga suddenly stopped her rambling when Izuku let out a laugh. Sorry, it's just that the way you started panicking was really funny. I'm not that Saito guy, but my name is Izuku Midoriya. Nice to meet you. Izuku smiled and stretched out his hand to her. In reality, the smile and laugh were all fake, since his body was telling him to try and run or fight the girl in front of him before she could get any kind of sharp object in her hands. He still remembered just how dangerous Toga from his timeline was. Toga blinked a few times before she smiled and shaked Izuku's hand. I'm Himiko Toga, pleasure to meet you. What are you doing here? Do you live close? She innocently asked. He just couldn't tell her that he was here because of her, so he thought up a lie. Well, I'm actually waiting on some friends since they wanted to hang out here, Izuku said with an excited smile on his face. This was one of the best lies he could come up with, since most people would assume that he had friends, and it also gave him a reason to just stand alone and not look weird. What about you, Toga? Are you here with your friends? He asked. Her shoulders dropped a little. Not really, I'm actually here alone. I just like coming to this park since it's so peaceful. For a moment, her expression changed from one of happiness to a sorrowful one. He had seen her sad before, mostly because she couldn't kill one of her classmates or someone else, but this one felt different. Well, I'm going to be waiting for a while until they arrive, so want to chat for a bit? Izuku asked, which seemed to raise Toga's mood as she gave him a bright smile. The two of them talked for a while under the tree. Izuku learned a bit more about the girl. She really was different at the one he knew. She was friends with her entire class and had good grades, but for some reason the topic of quirks was always avoided, not by him, but she always seemed to change the conversation when it went near it. Another weird thing is that she didn't talk about her family. She mentioned in passing that she had an older sister, but not once did she ever talk about her parents. It was strange, but for some reason, maybe it was because he knew the future Toga, the way she acted almost seemed forced. The sound of chimes interrupted made their conversation come to a halt, and even weirder was when Toga took her phone out and checked something, and panic flickered on her face before quickly disappearing. If it had been anyone but Izuku, they might have missed it completely. Sorry Izuku, but I have to go, but it was really nice talking to you. Oh, that's okay, I enjoyed talking to you too. Would it be okay if we talked again another time? Izuku said. Toga stopped and looked conflicted, but only for a second as she smiled at him, but this one felt just a little less fake. I'd love to. Toga and Izuku exchanged numbers so that they could keep in contact. He waved at the blonde girl as she walked away, and when she finally disappeared after taking a turn, he let out a sigh. That was a lot more stressful than I expected. Izuku turned from the park and kept walking until he found an empty dark alley that he thought of as good enough. You handled it very well back then. For a second it seemed like you were going to punch her, Forth said, and the worst thing is that he wasn't wrong. It was just my instincts acting up, and after more than a few years of her trying to kill me, seeing her act so friendly made me feel weird. Izuku shuddered as he remembered the strangely normal conversation they had, but then he remembers, did any of you notice anything weird on how she acted? Apart from her not being a serial killer, nothing really. She was just a normal middle school girl, Third said. And that's exactly what's wrong, First said, catching everyone's attention. One doesn't just start killing out of nowhere, they need a reason. Something that triggers something inside of them, like a kind of accident that makes them turn to villainy. Hisoshi just shook his head. Little brother, I don't think your knowledge in comic book heroes is going to help us solve this case, so if you could just leave it to the adults, that would be very kind of you. Before First could answer, Nana spoke. No, he's got a point. Many villains I fought back in my day had some kind of reason, be it money, revenge, a grudge, or simply because they enjoyed the thrill of it, but that's only a few of them who have a small goal like that. But the thing is, Toga looked fine. I still don't see why she would become a villain in the first place. Maybe something caused her to snap, Izuku began. Through the entire thing I had this strange feeling where she wasn't being honest. It reminded of myself, always just being kind, smiling, and her expression looked similar to mine. Okay, that's a good theory, but what would have caused her to snap so suddenly? Fifth asked. Her time at school seems fine, so we can take it off the list. So you are saying that it's something outside of her school life, maybe her family? Six said. It was a good theory, but it couldn't just be restricted to her family. Maybe a group was messing with her and the stress finally brought her to insanity. There were too many possibilities, and he barely had any information on this version of Toga. The best thing to do now was wait and see if he could gain any more information from here, and if it came down to it, he could probably follow her home and see for himself. But for now, as red lighting sparked around Izuku as he activated a few body-enhancing quirks at once, and then the familiar green sparks of full cowl as he used 2% of one for all, he jumped, shooting upwards and landing on the roof of a building. He needed to head home and begin the second art of his plan. Night soon fell on the city, the time Izuku had been waiting for. Now wearing a red hoodie to cover his hair, a black face mask that covered his freckles, weighted gloves, a pair of knee pads and steel-toed black shoes that he had stolen from a few stores, he was wearing these clothes because they are the exact opposite of what Izuku Midoriya would wear, so like this he was trying to throw people off his tail by breaking his whole green dress code. He felt a little guilty, but he had no time to waste on trying to get gear, so this was the best choice. So far, what do you think of my quirk, son? That warping quirk made stealing those items much easier, and I told you that using those body-enhancing quirks to use one for all was a good idea, Hisoshi proudly said. Izuku was still not used to having him around, and even less using the quirks he stole from others, but if he wanted to have a chance at changing his future, he would need to use every weapon in his arsenal. He concentrated as he felt a kind of list of the different quirks he possessed appear in his mind. He searched through it to find the ones he would need: Strength Enhancer 3 times, Healing Booster 4 times, Black Whip, Smokescreen. This should be a good combination of quirks, but maybe a few more amplifier quirks wouldn't be bad, so let's put OFA energy output at 30% to make them stronger. Izuku kept muttering as he prepared his quirks. The vestiges felt a shiver run down their spines as they finally saw a scary resemblance to his father, who looked proudly at his son. Red sparks surrounded Izuku as the quirks were filled with energy. the strength enhancers putting his body somewhere along the same place he was when he finished All Might's training, the healing quirks keeping his body from the stress of the sudden enhancement and the other quirks from the vestiges. Izuku began his move as he jumped from building to building, getting closer to his target. His investigation on Shinsu had to be a little more in-depth as he had to search for the family that had adopted him at this time and their residence. His approach would be different than one he gave to Toga. Visiting him at school was almost impossible as his school wasn't just far away but at the other side of town, so going from his school to then run to see Toga and then hurry to try and catch Shinsu and go back home at an hour that didn't make his mother start thinking something was wrong would be an impossible task since he didn't have a teleporting quirk. The other reason as to approach him as a vigilante was to try and help him believe in people more than he did before. Shinsu usually thought that everyone was out to get him because of his quirk, and that made him become bitter and lonely as he pushed everyone away. Both of them meeting in the sports festival was a kind of trigger for both of them. Shinsu saw that his quirk wasn't a burden and that people did like him, and for Izuku it reminded him as to why he fought and remind him of his roots. Finally Izuku made it to the home of Shinsu's adoptive parents. It was a rather luxurious home. Nowhere near anything from Todoroki or Yaozu but above a lot of others. He looked through them and saw that they already had a few younger kids, but they adopted to make themselves seem like better people to their friends and strengthen their connections. Izuku jumped off the roof and activated air walk and float, allowing him to easily walk in the middle of the air and walk to an open window with a few purple hair sticking out. "Hello," Izuku said as he finally reached the window, surprising Shinsu, who jumped back and fell off his bed. Sorry, I didn't mean to startle you. Are you okay?" Izuku asked as Shinsu looked at him with surprise. Who are you?" Shinsu asked. Izuku was surprised not only by how he looked like but the way he acted. Future Shinsu was skinny, but this one had no meat on his bones. His hair was even more of a mess than usual. His arms were covered in red and blue bruises and the bags under his eyes looked worse than normal, and he seemed a lot more shy than his future self, who had a sharp silver tongue. Izuku's blood boiled. He was being abused and barely fed by his own family. It seems like the situation is much worse than Izuku had originally thought. "I don't mean you any harm, I'm just your friendly vigilante passing by," Izuku said, hoping that he doesn't come off as a threat. Shinsu still looked at him with nervousness, but his guard seemed to lower even if just a little. "And what are you doing here?" "I was just passing by, searching for any bad guys who need a little ass kicking. You know, the usual. But then I saw you sitting there all sad and moopy looking at the stars. Is something wrong?" Izuku acted in a much more outgoing and goofy manner than he usually would. This was to try and get closer to Shinsu, to look like a kind and warm person who wore their emotions on their sleeve. No, nothing's wrong. But what's a vigilante?" Shinsu asked. Seeming less tense, Izuku smiled as he saw that his plan was already working, but felt a little bad since he was using the trust Shinsu was putting on him like this, but he knew it was for the better, so he pushed it aside. He can deal with it later. "Wow, you don't know about us. I don't know if I should be offended or surprised," he chuckled. "Well, vigilantes are like heroes. We go around beating bad guys with our quirks, but the only difference is that heroes need to do all this annoying paperwork, but we just can't wait." His voice suddenly took a sadder tone as he continued. "The reason we can't wait depends on who you ask. Some have a grudge, some just didn't want the paperwork, others have lost important people and don't want others to go through that. But in the end, all we want is to help others." Izuku turned to Shinsu with a sad expression. The purple-haired boy now looked at him with less fear and more awe. "You know what? I like you, kid. I have to go, but I'll come and visit when I can." Izuku was about to leave when Shinsu called out to him. "Wait. What's your name?" Izuku froze. A name. He hadn't thought about that. In his last life he had tried going nameless. He used the name Deku if things went badly, but he never gave the idea much thought. Even now he didn't care about it since he wouldn't be helping people too much as he would be looking for information, so he didn't expect himself to stand out too much. But it was only one person, how much would it hurt? But it only brought the same problem back, a name. He couldn't go with Deku again. It was too early, and if somehow word of him does get out, it could be traced back to him. A new name would be better, maybe a nickname or something from his past life. Izuku started going back on memory lane of his past life, the time he spent with his friends, his family, his teachers, all the battles he went through. One would think that being able to think of them and still stand would make someone happy, but for him these memories are bittersweet. Those times haven't happened, and with how much he was messing with the timeline, they might never happen again. These were memories that only he held, and the people in them would never know. He smiled with them, laughed with them, he grieved their deaths, and after all of that, he was the only one who was left, the scraps that fell off the table. Remnant, call me Remnant. With that, Izuku disappeared into the night. Izuku stopped, wiping the seat from his brow, and looked at his hard work. Right now he was in Dagobah Beach moving the trash like he had done in his last life for his training. It was strange at first finding the beach covered in garbage once more, but it at least gave him a good reason to start working out. Aside from that, it also helped with controlling his quirks. Since the way you gain muscle is by hurting the fiber of his muscles and letting them heal, it would activate his healing quirks and ruin the process since they don't help them grow. So he decided to use this chance to train his control over them, and that part ended up being more of a challenge than he expected. He sat down on the sand and took a drink from his water bottle. If he was correct, at least 2 months had passed since he first came back, and quite a lot had already changed. His friendship with Toga was going smoothly. She talked freely about her classes and friends, and she seemed more comfortable around him, but sometimes her expressions still seemed forced, so maybe he should get to that at some point. Shinsu was going much faster than he had expected. At the beginning, he seemed really shy and nervous to talk to him, but now, he was welcomed with an excited smile. Shinsu was always asking for him to tell him any stories he had, and he even started to look better when he started to bring him lunch. But making friends wasn't his only mission. Using his vigilante persona, he started looking for information on his main targets, Shigaraki and Overhaul. Until now he hasn't found any information on Shigaraki, so it means that he doesn't make himself known to the world until they start recruiting to attack the USJ, but it was a completely different story for Overhaul. Rumors about him were almost everywhere: an insane scientist that is planning on a big breakthrough, an ex-Yakuza who plans to take revenge on his old boss, a monster that has been recruiting thugs for his army that he plans to use to attack the city. All of them were lies, but in them you could find little pieces of the truth, and by piecing them together, Izuku found out that even though he was already making a name for himself, his experiments for the quirk-erasing bullets haven't started yet. So that could mean that Eri was okay, but for how long? Izuku let out a sigh as he shook his head. Overhaul was for later. Right now he needed to focus on the next step of his plan. Since now he had a good amount of muscle and could control the healing quirks, it was time to hit his next target. Izuku was walking home, and before long, he heard them before he saw them. "Hey Deku!" The familiar voice brought pain to his heart. He let out a sigh. He knew he would have to face him at some point, and even if he had already practiced his lines, he knew that they would be hard for them to come out, so he turned around and faced his childhood friend. Bakugo, like usual, was followed by a few other kids, all of them wearing excited smiles as they looked down at him. "What the hell have you been doing these past few weeks? Always just disappearing and avoiding us as if we were villains," Bakugo said as he took a step closer to Izuku, who only looked down at his feet, his face covered by the shadows his hair made. Finally Bakugo grabbed his shoulder as he used his quirk to burn him once more. "Or do you just think that some pathetic piece of trash like you is better than us?" It happened in an instant, the sound of flesh hitting flesh, sparks popping in the air, the gasps, and finally, the sound of the blonde boy hitting the ground. Bakugo was in shock, the cold concrete under him, the dwindling warmth on his hand from his quirk, and the pain in his jaw from the punch Izuku gave him. He looked at the green-haired boy, his sight already going red and ready to strike back, but froze on the spot when he saw the expression on Izuku. Anger. Anger was an emotion that didn't come easy to him, and he knew that. He had spent his entire life with him. Izuku was a kind boy that always wanted to help others, and even when bullied, he never said anything and treated everyone as friends. But right now, that boy was gone. Bakugo couldn't recognize the one that stood in front of him, his shoulder burning, most likely to give him another scar, tears streaming down his face, a scowl on his face as his eyes seemed to shine a dangerous red, his bruised fist shaking in anger. "I'm done," Izuku said, his shaky voice sounding tired after just one punch shattering the silence between them. "I'm tired of this, of being pushed around by you when I haven't even done anything to you." His voice started to rise in tone, more tears falling to his eyes, but the fire in them never went out. "I'm avoiding you?" "You're right, because I don't want to get hurt anymore. Do you know how hard it is to go back home and hide all of these from my mom?" Izuku yelled, and guilt, for the first time in a long time, struck Bakugo. He had forgotten about Auntie Inko, he had stopped talking to her after he distanced himself away from Izuku, and he had not once thought about the stress he was putting on her. Izuku didn't stop, even if his throat started to get sore, he couldn't stop the words that kept pouring out and the anger that kept growing. Better than you? Who said I thought I was better than you? Ever since we were kids, I have looked up to you, wanted to be like you, I never dreamed of being better than you, all I ever wanted was just to stand side by side with you. The anger in his voice started to turn to grief. The emotions Izuku kept hidden from his past life had started to poke its ugly head, and the anger, grief and pain from it all just kept coming, swallowing Izuku like waves as they dragged him away from shore. So why? What did I do for you to hate me so much? Izuku grabbed his shirt as he looked at the shocked Bakugo who was frozen to the ground. I don't want to ever see you again, Bakugo. Izuku spit out his name, completely forgetting the nickname he had always used and ignoring the pained look in his eyes as he turned around and ran. A memory suddenly jumped to the front of his mind, one that he took a hold of to try to keep himself from being dragged by his own emotions. The boy stood in front of him, tears streaming down his face, a truly rare sight even for him, the cold air making a shiver run down his body as he listened to his breaking voice, his red eyes shaking from the emotions welling up inside him. Why did I become the reason for all Might's end? Izuku snapped from his anger, all of his energy drained as he finally heard the voices calling out to him. Kid, can you hear us? Nana said, holding his arms. It would do nothing to stop his movement, but for some reason he could feel warmth from where she held him and it was keeping him grounded. He looked around and saw that he was sitting down in an alley. He must have shut down after the intense wave of emotions. My head feels like it's going to be split in half. What happened? Izuku said. The vestiges looked at each other in worry except for his father, who just stared at him with a serious expression. You don't remember anything? Second asked. Izuku just shook his head. He remembers confronting Bakugo, but everything was blurry, it almost felt like he wasn't completely there. Well, let's just say that things went a little south, but you definitely left an impact on him, Fourth said. Izuku just accepted it. He knew it wasn't going to be easy, so this really wasn't much of a surprise. He slowly stood back up using the wall to stable himself. Even if his legs were shaking, he forced himself to walk. He was going to take a nap when he got back home. Hisoshi stayed in his spot as he watched his son slowly walk away, but he couldn't stop thinking about what they had seen back there. His younger brother stood next to him looking at him with anger. What the hell was that? He snarled. What they had seen was indeed not normal. The way his eyes turned red, the dangerous aura around him and the never-ending whispers that came from it, those were something that he had hoped he wouldn't see in his son, but it seems that with the addition of his brother's quirk, they only became more noisy, some unwanted passengers. Night had fallen on the city and Izuku had gotten to work once more. He stretched his arms and his back as he finally moved from the ledge he had been sitting for more than a few hours. Izuku had a way of finding trouble, but he figured out that trouble finds him much easier, so he wasn't surprised by the group of thugs that walked into an alley he was watching. But he didn't act immediately. These kinds of people could easily let out secrets from the underground since they didn't know the importance of them, so they were a nice fountain of information. What do you guys think about the news? One began as they pulled out a pack of cigars from their pockets. Another scoffed, effing mad. That Stain guy always takes the spotlight when he comes to town and never leaves anything for the rest of us. He even got that stupid title as the hero killer, as if he was the only one to kill heroes. Izuku perked up at hearing the familiar name. He hadn't thought about Stain in a while. The third one let out a rough laugh. If he didn't have his stupid kitchen knives, I bet he would be a little puppy with a punchable face. The thugs found this funny and started to laugh at how a disarmed Stain would be easy prey, but he just rolled his eyes. He had seen an unarmed Stain, and the sight of his nail covered in blood and skin was not a pretty sight. That man was stubborn until his grave, even taking one of Ida's arms with him. But these were good news. His meeting with Stain was supposed to be much later down the line, but if he was able to stop him now, not only would he get rid of a problem early, but he could save the Ida brothers from their fate at his hands. Since he could easily track Stain later with whatever articles the news put out, this was more than enough information, so he just stood up, stretched out his hand and whispered, "Smokescreen," and quickly a cloud of smoke spread from his hand, quickly descending on the thugs as they looked around in a panic. The red lighting quickly surrounded Izuku as he jumped down, landing directly on top of one of the thugs, making him crash against the ground hard, immediately knocking him out. The thick smoke kept him hidden from the other two thugs as they screamed for each other and used their quirks trying to find him, and this would also be a problem to him, but thanks to an infrared vision quirk his father had, he could easily spot the remaining two. Izuku shot forward, tackling the one in front of him, forcing him to put his own weight on his bad leg. Wait, how did he know that? The thug couldn't keep his balance and fell to the floor. Izuku didn't wait and shot out Black Whip and wrapped it around their legs and threw them against a wall, which was more than enough to knock them out. The smoke was already disappearing and it allowed the last one to see his unconscious partners and the small red vigilante who was now looking at him. The last thug gulped, and from his hands a sharp pair of claws extended from his fingers and he lunged at the vigilante. Izuku reacted far more quickly. Already used to life-threatening fights with much dangerous adversaries, he ducked under the first swing and caught the second one, giving him an opportunity to kick him in the ribs where a badly healed wound rested, causing the man to stumble and lose his breath. Izuku finished it quickly by giving the man a good kick to the head with his steel-toed boot, knocking them out and leaving an ugly bruise. Izuku took off his mask as he took a deep breath of cold air. The way he saw them through the smoke and the way he knew of their weaknesses, it wasn't just the infrared quirk he was using. It took him a little, but he found the other quirk he had been using. It had a familiar feeling attached to it and the image of the person came to his mind. It was Ragdoll's stolen quirk, Search. It must have been activated when he needed a quirk to see through the smoke, and it combined with infrared, allowing him to see their heat signatures and weaknesses. In his timeline, Ragdoll had her quirk stolen after the training camp was attacked, but now, he had it in his possession so he could give it back. No, he wouldn't give it back. He would stop her from getting hurt in the first place so that she doesn't lose it in the first place. You could just say you want to keep the quirk, his father said, completely bringing him out of the moment he was having, and looked back at him with a glare as Nana tried to slap the back of his head only for it to go right through him. Izuku sighed and looked at the unconscious villains resting on the floor. He had been doing this for a while now and the news had started to pick up on it, saying that bruised and unconscious villains had begun to be found on the streets and that no one knew who had caused this, and that even the villains were confused on who attacked them as all of them gave different stories about their assailant, making it impossible to discover their identity. Izuku wouldn't say it out loud, but he was having a bit of fun playing with the authorities as they tried to track him down, knowing that it all would be for nothing. He looked again at the bodies and smirked as an idea began to form in his head. In one side, it would be incredibly risky and could get him caught, but on the other, he could make early contact with one of his friends and make things even more of a mess for the people trying to find him. Oh, who cares? He had a rough day today. He deserves a little bit of mischief. He began searching one of the bodies, looking through their pockets looking for something. I think their wallets might have fallen over here actually, his father trying to help said, but Izuku just rolled his eyes as he found their phone. He used their fingerprint to unlock it and went to put in a number. Let's see if he remembered it. It began to ring. Who the hell is this and how did you get my number? Aizawa's harsh voice came from the speakers, and it was almost enough to get him to the brink of tears as he remembered the times this teacher had been an important pillar for his growth and survival in the future. But of course, the bitter memories of darker times were not far behind. Eraserhead had been made the leader of their little group as he was one of the remaining heroes that was still alive or not turned into Nomus. He had done his best to lead all of them through the remains of the city that looked like a wasteland, using his quirk to make fights against Nomus easier, but at one point, things went south and a surprise attack led by Darby on their hideout at the time forced him to rise up and fight back the waves of beasts and the fire quirk user. He went out with a peaceful smile knowing that he had at least protected his students and his two kids. Hey Mr. Aizawa, how are you tonight? Izuku said with an excited tone in his voice. Don't dodge my questions, who the hell are you? Aizawa answered back, clearly irritated that someone had managed to figure out what his private number was, but all Izuku could do was laugh. Oh come on Eraserhead, don't be such a meanie, you are getting a call from the new mysterious vigilante that has been making the rounds recently. This should be an honor. For you really, Izuku teased. Making his teacher mad was just a little payback for everything he had to endure under his time at UA. Seriously, he almost had a heart attack with the expulsion thing in the first day. Right, as if I would believe that some random criminal figured out my number just to talk about themselves, Aizawa said, anger clear as day in his tone. Izuku let out a gasp as he raised a hand over his chest, acting as if he was hurt. A criminal? Mr. Aizawa, you wound me. I would much rather prefer the title of a Dark Defender, Izuku said, causing his future teacher to groan from the other side of the speakers. But don't worry, I'm not just here to talk about myself, I actually wanted to give you some information. You see, I just happened to run into this little group of bad guys and well, I would like for someone to pick them up, Izuku said, and he could feel the glare his teacher was giving to the phone as he told him the street he was in. I can't believe you are so easily giving yourself up to the police. I at least thank you for making my job easier. Izuku laughed at Aizawa's words. Who said I would be giving up? If you want to catch me, you are going to have to try harder than that. Like I said, I just need someone to pick up the trash. So better luck next time, Eraserhead, Izuku said before crushing the phone on his hand and letting out a happy sigh that had worked wonders on his mood. Good prank, but you better leave before he comes to find you, First said with a small smile. Small breaks like these were not so bad after all. By the time Izuku had already climbed through his window and jumped at his bed, he was already asleep before his head hit the bed. But his rest seemed to be cut short as he woke up, not to his ceiling but to a white empty void devoid of life except for himself. He looked around, no sign of light, people or even sounds could be heard in this place. He slowly stood up. He was still wearing the clothes he had been wearing before going to sleep. Was he attacked by a quirk? Was he kidnapped? No, it couldn't be. He had changed some of his history, but this was too big of a change to be normal. Maybe a dream? He pinched his arm and felt the pain clear as day, so that took the idea of a dream away. Maybe. He closed his eyes and concentrated on his surroundings. The energy around him felt familiar but slightly different at the same time. He was inside of one of his quirks, but the question was which one. The other vestiges are nowhere to be found, and the usual black mist that surrounds him is also missing, so that crosses it out of the list. But could he go inside the quirks that were inside All for One, or was he inside it? But why was it so empty? He decided to walk around to see if he could find anyone or really anything. The white void seemed endless as he couldn't see the end. Every step he took seemed heavier than the last. His chest became heavier and heavier, making him start gasping for breath with his hand on his knees. The air barely seemed to get into his lungs. Sweat dripped down his face, incredibly tired from what could be hours of walking. It was as if something had covered them. He slowly felt as bile began to rise from stomach already retching, trying to get it out so he could breathe again. He fell to his knees as he began to puke his own guts out. It tasted rancid, nothing akin to food, but instead it reminded him of the disgusting smell of rotting corpses and the bitter taste of blood. When he looked at the floor, instead of the usual green puke, he saw this strange black and red sludge that was moving? Almost as if in cue, another batch began to rise from his throat, filling his nose with the disgusting smell and tainting his mouth with the taste of blood. He could do nothing as more and more of it began to come out of his mouth, almost as if a river of the stuff had formed inside him. The sludge in front of him began to grow more and more around him as an endless waterfall of sludge kept pouring from his mouth, almost causing him to choke a few times. But what surprised him even more was that the sludge around him started to move even more, and in it he could see the deformed faces of people. Finally, the endless stream of sludge had stopped letting him breathe for once, but his surrounding had already been fully covered by it, the sludge reaching above his knees and somehow taking over the white void, tainting it in a deep red. He slowly stood up, his lungs feeling heavy and his legs shaking. He tried to move, only for him to have to force his own legs to move as the sludge seemed to grab at his legs. Out of nowhere, an ear-shattering cry broke the silence of the void and shook Izuku to the core. It wasn't a simple cry, it was painful, filled with sadness and hatred, and it seemed distorted since he could hear thousands of different types of voices in this singular scream. Young and old, male and female, all of them joined together for this one single scream, causing all of Izuku's senses to tell him to run. And run he did, even with the sludge trying to claw at his legs. He kept running, with all the adrenaline and fear in his body being the only things that kept him moving. But things only became worse as the sludge began to shake. Waves rippled all around him. Some were able to hit him, but he didn't seem to be their target, and he only noticed why when he turned around. Behind him, coming at him at an alarming speed, was a giant wave of the sludge, faces of anguish, pain, and some that seemed to be screaming, all clearly visible on it, and they all had their attention on him. Izuku began to run once again, tears falling down his face as he called out for help, but his voice was drowned by the screaming. Hands began to shoot out of the sludge, grabbing his legs, making him fall face first to the ground. He tried to shake the hands of him, but every second more and more came out of the sludge and pulled at him, and all he could do was watch as the wave towered over him as it came closer to him. Izuku screamed for help until his voice finally left him and his lungs burned, his eyes burning from all the crying, his hands red from his trying to claw away at the sludge and finally only letting out a pathetic whimper as the wave consumed him and his world died in red. Izuku woke up with a gasp, covered in cold sweat. He sat up straight and looked around to see his room, the different hero figures and posters on the walls and the cold air of the night coming through his opened window as he looked at the nighttime sky. Tears welled up in his eyes and he whimpered as he remembered the screaming in his head. He pulled the covers over him as if they would protect him from danger and hugged his knees as he let out quiet sobs out into his dark room. Izuku yawned as he walked to school, eyes half opened and the bags under his eyes more prominent than ever and his hair an even worse mess than it usually was as he couldn't get rid of the conversation he and the other vestiges had after his nightmare. To the surprise of nobody, "It looks like my brother effed up again," First said while glaring at his older brother who pouted as he glared at the corner where they had told him to sit. "In my defense, I had a small idea that adding my quirk would do something to our spirits but I didn't expect that it would work so well," answered Hisoshi sounding like a little kid who got scolded by his parents. "No, this is just great. I already had to deal with all of you so why not add a few thousand more that go feral at the thought of my own father," Izuku said, sarcasm dripping from his voice as he looked at the ceiling. "Well," Fifth sighed as he sat down in the chair, "since he was like a ghost, he just phased through it, in front of his desk right now. They can't do anything then just give you a few nightmares and give a push to your own feelings. It's nothing too bad." Izuku just let out a groan at this as he put his arm over his face. Sure, he had dealt with nightmares longer than any healthy person ever should, but the idea of having someone mess with your emotions was not something that he felt comfortable with in the slightest. "Deku!" Izuku almost jumped out of his skin after hearing Bakugo's voice scream at him, forcing him to come back to the present. He turned around to look at the explosive boy who looked at him with anger, but after seeing the sorry state he was in, that anger seemed to go out for a few seconds but just as quickly came back, if only a little dimmer. "You bitch. You think you can just punch me and walk away with your effing hands intact?" Bakugo threatened. Izuku didn't get angry, really he just wanted a nap and not deal with this version of Bakugo since today was supposed to be about making advances with the other two kids, so he just rubbed his eyes and said, "Bakugo, could we not do this Toda-dash? Don't call me that." Izuku was taken by surprise by the blonde's scream. "Why are you calling me that? What the hell happened to that stupid nickname hair?" Izuku was really confused. Was he referring to Kaken? That was what made him so angry? Izuku just let out a tired sigh. Maybe it was because he was so tired, but his next words came out much colder than he wanted them to. "Kaken? That nickname? Well, I'm sorry to inform you, but recently I realized that the person that name used to belong to doesn't exist anymore. I was blind to that fact for a long time. Maybe it's time you open your eyes too," Izuku said, leaving a stunned Bakugo behind him. But he didn't get far as he heard the explosion behind him, his instincts that he had developed from years of fighting kicking in as he ducked, dodging Bakugo who flew over him, his hands sparking and his eyes filled with a mixture of emotions. "What are you doing?" Izuku asked as he turned around and took a step back, dodging another hit from Bakugo. "I'm trying to teach you a lesson," he screamed, sending a fist to Izuku who blocked it and moved back again, making more distance between them. "What are you going to do if this happens to you again, hair?" Bakugo continued between punches. "You are a weak, quirkless kid. How the hell do you even plan to defend yourself?" His punches and explosions continued one after another, but Izuku never sent one back, only ever dodging and blocking his attacks. He knew his fighting style like the back of his hand, and even more now since he barely had the base for it, so his moves were easy to predict. "Do you think that you can beat someone who could destroy a car with a flick of their hand with just your fists?" Tears began to form in the corner of his eyes as he sent a right hook. "You and your shitty dream of being a hero. Did you even stop and think how we would feel if you got hurt?" Izuku's eyes widened in surprise, but his body reacted first. He leaned away from the right hook and grabbed his arm as he pulled him down, as he quickly used his leg to sweep his legs and throw him to the ground. Both were panting. Izuku only stared at Bakugo, who stayed on the ground, his chest going up and down as he took deep breaths. The only reason the blonde kid didn't stand back up was because of the surprise of him being defeated by the once weak Deku. Bakugo, you aren't as selfish as I thought. Hearing you say that you worry about me makes me really happy, but you should know better than anyone that I am not giving up on my dream. Izuku wiped the sweat on his forehead and fixed his uniform as he turned around from the stunned boy. I'll ask you the same question you did to me. When you thought about teaching me a lesson, did you ever stop and consider my own feelings? I hope you know that no matter what you do, I won't stop. So one day I'll show you that I am capable of becoming a hero and you'll have no other choice but to accept it. With those words said, Izuku walked away, ignoring the surprised looks of the people who had stopped and looked at their fight. Bakugo stayed on the ground for a few more seconds until he finally slowly stood back up. He could only see Izuku's fading silhouette, but he noticed the hundreds of ways he looked different from the boy he used to know. He was taller, the same height as him at this point. His eyes seemed harder and if only a little dimmer. He filled his uniform better than before and the way he carried himself was much different. He exudes this dangerous and confident aura around him that one would need to spend years to make. When did he change so much? By the time Izuku arrived at school, things finally slowed down. He was scolded for getting late. Meanwhile, Bakugo, who arrived after him, wasn't even given a glare. For the rest of the day, neither of the two made any move at each other. This confused their classmates. Had something happened for Bakugo, who always got mad at Izuku for even breathing near him, to not even give him a glance? Since no one understood what was going on, they decided to trust their gut and not mess with Izuku so as to not get into the explosive blonde's bad side. Even if Izuku had a good day in school, his mind was still working overtime for his plans, giving him a headache. His plan to get a better relationship with Bakugo early on has taken a different turn than expected. At the beginning he just wanted to get it done with words, but he should have expected that it wouldn't work. He has always been a person who shows his emotions through actions than words, so he would need to make some changes to accommodate to it. His next problem was what he heard the other night. Stain was in town and that made a perfect chance to take him down before he could cause any damage to his friends, but then came the question, was he ready to fight him? When he first fought Stain, he was capable of using 5% in full cowl, but now he could only use 2% after using a few strengthening quirks. But on the other side, he now held the other quirks inside, all for one and one for all, but using them in the state he was in could end with horrible results. "You'll be fine," said his father, who only added to the pain. "Those healing quirks kept me alive after that blonde oaf bashed my skull in, so that Stain guy can't do anything to you. What we are worried about isn't what he can do, it's the possible crippling backlash that the quirks could have on his body." Third said, "Unlike you, none of us had quirks to keep us in top health." "Rip to you, but I'm different," his father said, making first, second and third grunt but only confusing the others. When he noticed this, he only shaked his head with a sad expression. "I keep forgetting about the 200-year gap." Ignoring that strange comment, Izuku continued down his list of problems. The next problem would be those other two kids, Toga and Shinsu. He had made great progress with Shinsu, getting him to feel comfortable with him so he didn't hide the bruises he got during the day, but the problem was that he wasn't sure if they were close enough for him to talk about it, and if he wanted his case to actually be looked into he needed solid proof that something was happening, and if the victim themselves denied the accusations then it would completely be dismissed. His relationship with Toga had also reached a good level where she felt comfortable enough where she could take her mask off a little with him. She finally started to complain about her school with him, but it was nothing of what they were looking for. Mostly it was just stuff about homework or the teachers being too stiff, which took it off the list, leaving only the possibility of something outside of it being the cause, but that still left more than a few options. But there was one thing he wanted to change in their next meeting. Quirks. Up until now the only thing they had not talked about was their quirks. He already knew about theirs, but they were both things that had affected their lives greatly, so he had hoped that they would bring it up since he was still supposed to be quirkless, so it would be a little weird. He had shown his interest in them in subtle ways, like by telling them on how he wants to be a pro hero, and so he studies quirks, but he never specifies that he has one. Following his usual routine, he quickly walked down the street until he arrived at the familiar park he had been visiting. He looked around until he finally spotted Toga sitting in their usual meeting spot, a simple wooden bench that they liked to sit down and chat, but today something about her fell off. Her shoulders were stiff, her legs were bouncing up and down, and under her eyes were the beginning of dark circles. This was the first time he had seen her like that. Something must be wrong. Hey Toga, Izuku said as he walked next to her. She immediately sat up straight and looked at him with a surprised expression which quickly changed to relief with a sigh. He must have surprised her. Hi Izuku, she said back, letting her fatigue show as she slumped in her seat. Izuku sat down next to her with a confused look on his face. Is everything okay? You seem tired, he said, trying to not sound mean, but his question got a tired laugh out of her. Yeah, it's been a rough day, but you don't look that good either, she shot back now with a smile on her face. This was what their interactions had recently turned into, Izuku being his usual kind self and Toga revealing more of her teasing and fun side to him which he was more familiar with. Toga, you know that I really like quirks, right? He slowly started. This was going to be hard to approach. Yeah, why? She answered a little confused. Well, I was just wondering if you could tell me about your quirk. Izuku hastily finished his sentence as he gave her the best puppy eyes he could make. Toga was taken by surprise by his excitement. She knew about how much Izuku loved talking about quirks. He had told her about quirks from so many heroes, some in the top 10, some sidekicks and some she had never heard of, and even then when the quirk was something simple and boring, he could go hours talking about it, about the thousands of uses it had and what it still could do. He looked at every quirk with wonder and with a wish to learn. But what about hers? Her quirk was not like the others. It was dark, gross, evil. What if she told Izuku about it? Would he think differently of her? Would he still want to be friends with someone so unsightly like her? Would he still be her friend? She gulped down her fear and showed a shaky smile as she looked away from him, trying to hide the fear in them. Oh, it isn't interesting and it's really boring, you wouldn't like it. She tried to convince him to stop, but even then she knew how stubborn he was, but he was a kind person, so maybe he would stop asking when he saw her expression. And he did, mostly because he knew that her reaction would not be good, but he hadn't expected the fear and panic in her eyes. That's when he realized that unlike Shinisu, who was bullied by his quirk and grew a bitter anger to those who had more heroic quirks, but Toga. She was scared of it. She was scared of her own quirk. Izuku moved a little, giving the panicking girl her own space, and took a deep breath. He had thought that she wouldn't easily tell him, so he thought of an idea. Since I also haven't told you about mine, how about this? I tell you about my quirk and you tell me about yours. This was something that he had been planning from the beginning by not telling them about his supposed lack of quirk and then using it to get them comfortable with him. A kind of equivalent exchange. Quirks are seen as the main thing that makes an individual, so a lot of people like to keep them to themselves, so by offering this he was making her feel like he was putting the same amount on the table, making her lower her guard. Toga seemed conflicted for a minute. She still felt scared of telling him, but at the same time she was really curious about Izuku's quirk and to learn more about him. He never talked about it and yet he was so interested in them. You would think that he would have already made a library's worth of books about his own. So while looking at the kind and soft expression in his eyes, she nodded. Izuku smiled and took a deep breath and said, I'm quirkless. Her eyes widened in surprise at the statement and at how calmly he said it, and almost as if he had already said it countless times, yet in his eyes there was a shadow covering them as he waited for her answer, looking as if he had given up hope. He was quirkless. He was quirkless. This single line kept repeating in her head as she realized the weight of it. He had told her how much he wanted to be a hero, to help others and face villains with a smile, and he was quirkless. He had such large dreams and so little, almost non-existent, power, yet that didn't seem to stop him as he kept analyzing quirks and looking forward to the future. Not having a quirk is extremely rare nowadays, and there has never been any quirkless heroes, as the job has been seen as dangerous and only for those with powerful quirks, so for most, seeing someone who had nothing to fight or defend themselves, it was like a joke. Izuku must have gone through so much with a dream like that in his situation, and he decided to trust her by telling her about it. He trusts her enough to tell him, and yet she was scared of him judging her. As Toga took a few seconds to answer, tears began to form at the edges of Izuku's eyes as a bitter smile formed in his face. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have said that. I made things weird. I'll leave. Izuku quickly stood up and was ready to leave, but was stopped by Toga grabbing his arm. And no, wait. Sorry, I was just processing it. She closed her eyes and took a few deep breaths to calm herself down. She then looked back at Izuku, fear now fully present in his eyes and tears ready to fall. Thank you, it must have been hard to tell me that, so. I'll tell you, Toga said with a new spark of determination in her chest, and Izuku smiled brightly. They both sat down once again. Izuku wiped the tears in his eyes as he listened to the nervous girl. My quirk, it's called transform. It allows me to change my appearance into another person. It's only their looks. I can't replicate their memories, so that's a big downside. With that simple explanation, Izuku's eyes already were shining as if filled with stars, and she couldn't help the small smile that came to her, but it quickly fell when the next words came. But for it to work, I need to consume that person's blood. She didn't dare look at Izuku as she finally told him the truth. Her hands in her lap nervously played with her skirt, her mind filling with the ways he could answer. Guilt began to creep from her stomach all the way to her throat as the word of her family rang in her head. A normal girl doesn't like blood and dirty things like this. I can't believe my own daughter is a disgusting monster. Big sister is really weird. I don't want to play with her. I won't accept a monster like you as my daughter. Weed. Monster. Unwanted. Those were words that had deeply ingrained themselves into her heart since they had come from her own family, the people she most trusted. She tried her best to be what they wanted from her, a normal girl, so she hid everything about her own quirk and her interest in blood all deep down inside of her, and yet even now when they looked at her there were small traces of disgust. Whenever they touched her, they were always fleeting touches as they almost took their hand off her as if she had burned them. She hated it. She hated that part of herself, but every day, that small, ugly part would keep screaming for attention, only growing louder every day. Until now she had done her best to ignore it, but recently it had been hard, this seemingly endless hunger tormenting her at every hour of the day. Today had been a bad day, with it being stronger than usual, and yet, when she talked about it with Izuku, she felt as if a small weight had been taken off her shoulders, but at the same time she might have just lost another she cared about. Toga that. She closed her eyes as if it would do anything to soften the pain from the words that she knew were coming. That is such a cool quirk. Izuku replied excitedly, completely taking her off guard and making her eyes snap open as she turned to look at him in shock. You can do so many cool things with your quirk. Obviously the main one would be infiltration, but there are so many more things, like you could do information gathering while you hide as someone else, or maybe you could be a kind of wild card if when you change your appearance your strength also changes. Oh, but what about people with mutation quirks? Would you also gain the attributes that the quirk gives its user, or would it be erased, making you look like a normal person? As Izuku continued with his excited rambling, Toga paid no attention to it as she was trying to understand the feelings that kept blooming in her chest. Those words were ones that she had heard every day, but never once had they been directed at her. But the moment Izuku said them, it was almost as if a missing piece of her puzzle finally found its place. She felt warm and happy, happier than she had felt in almost her entire life. Tears began to spill from her eyes, her lips formed into a trembling smile and then broke into a bright smile, followed by an attack of giggles that she didn't want to stop. Izuku stopped his rambling when she lunged at him and wrapped his arms around him in a hug as she buried her head in his neck, tears falling from her face staining his clothes, but she didn't care as she felt almost years' worth of fears finally fall off her shoulders. She hung tightly to Izuku, to the one person in her life who had accepted her for who she was. Izuku froze when Toga jumped on him, almost fearing that she had finally snapped, but when she wrapped her arms around him and he heard the sobs that came from her, he realized that almost this entire time he had been thinking and sometimes treating her like a dangerous object that could hurt him if he wasn't cautious, when in truth, she is just scared, lonely kid who needed someone to be there for her. He slowly wrapped his arms around her and traced circles on her back, something he used to do with Ei when she also cried, as she let out more of her tears. By the time she had finally calmed down enough to talk again, she apologized for staining his clothes and thanked him repeatedly before she left for her home, looking better than before. Izuku left with a smile and a warm feeling in his chest. He had forgotten how good it felt to help others. Izuku looked down the ledge of the building he was sitting on as he looked at the night sky as he recalled the progress that he had made up until now. He's had a few fights with Bakugo, which really wasn't what he originally wanted, but in a way they seemed to be working to open that stubborn kid's eyes. He had made great progress with Toga, earning her trust, but even with just that he still hasn't been able to stop whatever her trigger to become a villain was. At least now he knows that it's definitely related to her quirk. With that, he also had a small theory brewing in his head, although it would be hard to prove. Now, the only other person who he needed to make the next big step. Izuku jumped down and used float to slow down his descent into the fire escape that was outside of Shinsu's room. He felt a lot less nervous about this talk with him than he felt with Toga, since he already knew what was happening, and that allowed him to make a much more detailed plan. But even when taking in everything into account, another random factor could always enter the equation and ruin it all. "Hey Remnant," Shinsu warmly greeted him with a smile, as he usually did when he came to visit. Their relationship had quickly grown as Izuku learned more about his friend than he had in his past life, and he helped Shinsu by giving him at least a moment free of the pain and darkness from his home. Even if it was with just a small chat, he was more than glad he could help. "Hey kiddo," he answered back with a wave. His hoodie and mask still hid most of his features, only his green eyes stood out in the night, but even if they met in the street one day, he shouldn't be able to recognize him. His plan for this stage is just to change both of their lives, but not change too much about them, so that the timeline doesn't change too drastically that it goes out of his control, but even so he might be able to move forward a few events. That is what he is hoping to accomplish today. Their meeting went as usual, simple questions that one would have every day, and yet it seemed like such precious moments to him. He couldn't help but feel sad. He then looked down at Shinsu's arm. At the beginning he would hide with either his covers or long-sleeved shirts to hide all the bruise marks he has, and the first time he saw them, even if he already knew where they came from, he still asked about it. Shinsu easily lied, saying that he had just fallen. Izuku just nodded and moved along. He asked again and Shinsu said that he had an accident while playing. He asked again and he just lied. Again. And again. And again. After a while, Izuku decided that if he didn't use a more aggressive approach he would never get a straight answer, because for his plan to work he needs him to be willing to talk. Because his plan is to get him out of that house. For a case of abuse to be taken to court, of course solid proof is needed, but if the victim doesn't talk or, in worst cases, goes against the claims, the entire thing could be dropped, so he needed to convince him to talk or else everything would be for nothing. When a pause in the conversation finally came, Izuku took his chance and asked as he pointed to the new purple bruise in his wrist, "How'd you get that?" Shinsu looked at his wrist and just gave him a bitter smile as he put his hand behind him. "Oh, just I just bumped a table and Shinsu, stop lying." Shinsu stopped the moment he heard Izuku's stern tone of voice, a big difference to his usual calm and relaxed one. "What was it before? You fell down the stairs, you tripped. Someone couldn't control their quirk?" "Shinsu, it's obvious you are lying. What is happening?" Shinsu flinched back when he realized that he was finally caught and he didn't know what to do. "Please kid, I'm your friend and I am worried about you, just let me help you," Izuku insisted. He already had half a foot through the door, so all he needed to do was push a little more. Will you really help me?" Shinsu asked, his voice trembling only moments away from breaking. The sting of pain from the thorns of believing in someone only for him to be let down again and again still stuck deep within his heart. His blood-related parents, from the time they realized what he was capable of, looked at him like some kind of monster and avoided him like the plague as they finally abandoned him. The kids at the orphanage, all of them welcomed him with smiling faces, but his DMN quirk came in and they all looked at him with fear and disgust. He then spent years under their bullying. Sometimes he still has nightmares of the muzzle they would sometimes put on him. His present family, this has been the most recent but also the one that most hurt. They gave him the glimmer of hope of getting him out of that hell, and for a while they did, but it all ended up being a lie, a mask they had put, as they then used him to make themselves look better, adopting a poor soul and taking care of them as if they were their own flesh and blood. What a lie. Those people didn't even see him as human but as a tool to make themselves seem like a blessed family. Now, Remnant, a random person that had just stopped by his window and started talking to him, maybe it was the loneliness or the fear of being alone, but he never told them to leave. Instead, they came back. He knew nothing about them, no name, not their quirk or really anything, yet for some inexplicable reason, he felt calm when they came around, with warm meals that tasted like a warm and lovely home and a soft and welcoming presence. Things that had never been in his life, and he clung to them like it was a shining silver rope thrown to him as he drowned in a pitch-black ocean. When he looked at the vigilante's green eyes that were filled with worry that was directed at him, for the first time in his life, he couldn't hold back the tears. His life story poured out of his mouth as if a dam inside him had broken, but through it all, Remnant stayed by his side, holding his hand, letting him breathe between sobs, letting him talk as he gave him an understanding look. This kind of warmth had been all he had been searching for his entire life. when he finally finished speaking. His chest burned him, and it wasn't because of his hard breathing or how long he had talked for, but all the emotions that were finally free from the little box he had kept them, his body still shivering from the outburst. But as Izuku softly held his shoulders as he almost seemed like he was going to collapse. "Thanks for trusting in me, Shinsu. I promise you, I'm going to get you out of here." He slowly let go of the tired boy's shoulders as he took out his phone. "Sadly, I'm nothing more than just a street rat, so I'm going to have to call a friend for help. Don't worry, he's also a hero. He may be a bit on the outside but nothing more than just a big softie." With that, as he left Shinsu to catch his breath as he walked up the fire escape to the roof. Once he made it back up, Nana's ghost appeared beside him as she gave him a warm smile. "Real proud of you, Izuku." The other vestiges also appeared as they repeated her own words. Even his father agreed, although reluctantly. Izuku then looked back down at the phone in his hand as he began to dial the number. Aizawa looked down at his phone as it started to buzz. It was an unknown number, yet he didn't ignore it like he usually would, as he had already gotten used to these late-night calls. He hated how they made him seem like a kind of obedient dog, but they also made his job easier. "Alright, where are they, Remnant?" Aizawa asked impatiently to the vigilante on the other side of the phono, who instead giggled as they had already done this one song and dance multiple times. "Sorry, Mr. Aizawa, but no villains this time. Instead, I wanted to ask for a favor," Izuku said as his plan slowly unfolded. "A favor? Brat, you are pushing it too far this time. I won't do some silly thigh." Aizawa was cut off mid-sentence by Izuku's voice. "I'll talk to you and Detective Tsukochi face to face. I'll even answer some of your questions." Aizawa stopped the anger that had started to rise when he heard the offer the vigilante made him. "It was really tempting. I won't be giving myself freely up to you so that you can put me in a jail cell, but it'll sure be more information than you have now." Aizawa couldn't help but gritted his teeth as he heard the vigilante. He only got angry because he was right. They barely knew that he was a young person because of his voice in their calls. They also knew that he must have a large web of connections since he got his private phone number, but that's all they had. They didn't know his quirk or possible multiple quirks. Hell, they didn't even know what his outfit looked like. Whoever Remnant was, they were almost like a phantom who had appeared out of nowhere. But now, the brat had contacted him just to share his own information, all in exchange for a favor. This had great pros and cons, as they could immediately fall right into his hands for his little game, but right now they had nothing, so this was their only lead and it came straight from the source. How could he throw a once-in-a-lifetime chance like this? Aizawa finally clicked his tongue as he answered, "Fine, but we set the place and no fighting. Just answer our questions and we'll do your stupid favor." He then let out an annoyed sigh as he told the vigilante the name of a street that was close to the police station but far enough to not seem suspicious. If things went wrong and that brat set them up for a trap, they could easily call for reinforcements and get out of it. Aizawa then swung through the city as he arrived at the department where Tsukochi works and quickly walked to his office, where he watched a bland man who looked like a skeleton with a pale face walk out of it, but he didn't pay any attention to it as he pushed the door open. He was immediately struck by shock and soon after confusion with the scene in front of him. The entire office was a mess as papers covered in text and different images littered the floor. In the middle of the room a small round table sat with two chairs beside it. One was empty, but by the empty cup of coffee in front of it, he could guess that it was not long ago that it had someone sitting in it not long ago. On the other hand, the other chair still had someone he easily recognized as the Detective Tsukochi by his short black hair and his familiar trench suit. Beside him was a rather large pile of papers and 2 cups of what he guessed was coffee mixed with an energy drink. But what had caught his attention was the large corkboard behind him that held multiple images and papers pinned to it, most of them also connected with a long red string. "Ah, Tsukochi, wake up, we've got something to do." Eraserhead called out to the man who had his head laid on the table, possibly unconscious or in the worst case possible, dead, but he doubted that last one. Tsukochi groaned as he felt the incoming headache from the past hour and a half finally catching up to him after talking about that. Eraserhead, "Sorry I didn't hear you come in, what's wrong?" Tsukochi then slowly sat back up straight as he sloppily put his hat back on his head. "It's about Remnant. The kid wants to talk to us, even said they'll answer some of our questions." These words seemed to be some kind of trigger for the detective as they immediately stood up with renewed vigor and quickly pushed Aizawa out the room. "What are you doing just looking surprised? Come on, let's move." "Where are we meeting them?" the detective asked as they pulled the underground hero like some kind of kid to their parents. All of this greatly confused Aizawa. Izuku waited for the arrival of Eraser and the detective sitting on the ledge of one of the buildings in the street that they had told him to wait for them. He soon noticed the approaching police car that was definitely breaking the speed limit, and as it stopped and parked, from it came out two figures, a very confused and surprised Eraserhead and a rather energized Tsukochi who looked like a complete opposite of his usual calm and slow persona. The detective frantically looked around looking for signs of the vigilante. Izuku decided to do them a favor and show himself. Hey, was all he had to say to gain their attention and for them to look up. In that moment a few more things about the mysterious vigilante became clearer: their black and red-colored outfit which hid most of his main traits well, and their voice which made them sure that this really wasn't a young adult but a child. "So you are Remnant, a lot younger than I imagined," the detective said as he burned the image of the vigilante into his mind. Izuku just shrugged. "Well, you said that you would answer our questions, so I hope that you will keep your promise. And don't even think about lying. My quirk allows me to tell when someone is lying." The detective surprisingly started to take the lead in the situation as they pulled out their notebook and a pen. "First thing, why are you fighting these villains? Revenge, a grudge, or were you hired by someone?" the detective asked, and Izuku almost burst into laughter. "Oh detective, aren't you overestimating me a little? What reason does someone need to help others?" Izuku instead decided to throw the question back. He already knew how the detective's quirk worked quite well, and it had more than a few loopholes to it. Many, after hearing that he was a living breathing lie detector, would give up the joking and answer directly, but that was only a trap he had set for his quirk to work better. The truth is that the truths and lies could easily be swayed. One loophole was that if one truly believed this to be the truth, then the quirk would mark it as truth even if it was a lie. Another loophole was that if the person answered back with a question, the quirk would not react as they had not answered the question. Tsukochi tightened his grip on his pen as his quirk didn't tell him anything. This kid truly must have one amazing web of information to know even his weaknesses, but he decided to move on. "How did you manage to gain Eraserhead's private phone number?" Izuku only smiled as he answered, "He gave it to me." If they could see the smirk on his face, they would explode in anger. "Truth?" Tsukochi turned to look at Aizawa, who looked just as surprised as him. "I never gave you my phone number. I don't even know who you are." Aizawa glared at the vigilante, who only looked down at them with an amused look in his eyes. Tsukochi moved on as his head only racked for a possible answer and instead took on a much colder expression. "Do you have multiple quirks?" This question itself seemed to lower the temperature around them as the mischievous glimmer in the kid's eyes completely disappeared, leaving only cold, sharp green eyes that stared daggers through them both. A heavy weight suddenly appeared in both of the adults' chests as they began to wait for the answer. The silence only lasted a few more seconds until Izuku finally spoke. "Yes," was all he said in a cold, sharp tone that made a shiver run down their spine involuntarily. Truth. The detective seemed much more affected by the answer than the sudden fear they had both felt, while Aizawa was trying to figure out why he had felt such pressure from a mere child. "If that is all, then I believe it's my turn." Izuku then used Black Whip to take the notebook and pen from Tsukochi and began to write the street and house where Shinsu lived. "My friend, a kid named Shinsu, is stuck in an abusive household, and as much as I would like to get him out of there myself, I don't have any way to get it into court. Instead, I'll ask this favor to you. Get him out of there and into a better family. That's all I am asking." He then gave back the notebook for them to look at the address. "Just that?" Aizawa asked rather confusedly. This was a rather simple request, and yet they put so much importance into it, it confused him greatly. "Well, that's all for our deal, so I'll see you again later." Izuku was stopped in his tracks when Tsukochi called out to him. "One last question, are you connected to AFO?" Tsukochi asked, his hands trembling as he said the acronym. Aizawa could only look at him in confusion as he didn't know what the three letters meant, yet with his reaction, the detective knew he had hit the mark. Izuku slowly turned to look at the detective, finally letting out a bit of his contained bloodlust, which was more than enough to freeze the detective in place and to cause Aizawa to get into a battle stance instinctively. Izuku's eyes were empty and cold, showing no emotion to those adults, as if they were nothing more than ants to him, and with a monotone and cold voice, he answered yes. In a burst of red electricity, Izuku jumped away, leaving the hero and detective duo in shock and slight fear as they got a slight glimpse of what truly was beneath the mask. Aizawa couldn't take his eyes off the disappearing red lighting that stood out in the dark night. Meanwhile, Tsukochi had brought out his phone in a panic, almost dropping it as he called one of the saved numbers in it. Only a few seconds passed before the familiar weak voice of Toshinori Kai through the speakers. "Tsukochi, why are you calling me? We just talked no too long ago. Did something happen, Bikao dash? Toshi, just listen, please F. He is still alive," the detective said in a panic as his heart had yet to stop beating from the terrifying encounter, cold sweat running down his back as all of his theories and fears were confirmed. The days quickly flew by and Shinsu saw no signs of Remnant after that night where he finally spilled his heart out. A slight fear wrapped around his heart like a snake. He trusted him more than anyone else in his life, so he knew that if Remnant lied to him and let him down, it would be a hard hit to his already wavering trust. The fear only took a deeper hold of him when the nights became empty without him coming by to talk. He had missed a few nights before but never almost an entire week. Had he forgotten about him? Had he been lied to once more? "Is this the place?" A man with an eye-catching and bright blonde hair wearing a black leather jacket asked as he looked to the tired man beside him who was looking at a direction that had been written on a piece of paper. "Should be. Now come on, let's knock." The man with messy long black hair walked a few steps to the front door of the building and knocked on the wooden door, and they waited for an answer. "Yes, who is I present MIC?" A man with light brown hair and pale skin that was covered in circles of multiple colors opened the door with a calm smile that instantly dropped in surprise when he saw a blonde hero standing in front of him. What can I do for you?" the man asked, trying to hide his excitement and panic with a shaky smile and hoped that they wouldn't notice his excessive sweating. "Hello sir, sorry for intruding, but we have come today because we received an anonymous tip of some problems going on in your street and we are asking the people here if they have seen anything. So if you could just give us a bit of your time, it would be very much appreciated," Hisashi said with a warm smile as Aizawa stood behind him, who only gave the man a cold stare. "Why yes, of course, but this little neighborhood of ours is very safe, so hearing about problems happening in it are very surprising. Oh, would you like something to drink? We have water, some juice, I could make you some coffee. Please just stay comfy here while I go get my family." The man led the two heroes into his home as he kept rambling purely out of panic as he then offered them seats in their living room and then quickly left as he rushed up the stairs. The man quickly went room to room telling his wife and his children about the situation until he reached Shinsu's room, which he entered with a stern look, all the warmth in his voice completely gone. "But right now we have some very important guests, so I don't want you making a ruckus, so quickly put something good on and be a good little kid and keep your mouth shut." With that and a slam from the door, the man left a sad Shinsu behind. To him, this kind of treatment wasn't new. When someone came to their home, they always made him act like he was mute to avoid any accidents with his quirk, even if he was good with it, all to make themselves seem like saints. Shinsu put on a long-sleeve shirt, pants, and shoes and headed downstairs with the rest of the family, who threw glances at him that he just ignored, but he couldn't help his surprise when he saw just who the guests were. Like any other kid, Shinsu was a fan of heroes, and since he had more than plenty of free time, he spent most of his time looking up videos, interviews, and articles about them. While doing that, he had stumbled into something called the Underground, which really was just the name the authorities gave the place where villains usually stayed in, and thus learned about the heroes that kept an eye on it and stayed hidden from the spotlight, those called underground heroes. And right now, his idol, Eraserhead, was sitting right in front of him looking bored, which was actually just his normal face, so how could he not start to panic? Finally being side by side of his adoptive family, one could easily spot the differences. His messy purple hair compared to their light brown was one of the many differences. Their tan skin was a stark contrast to his pale skin. Present MIC cleared his throat, trying to break the awkward silence that had fallen between the panicking family and the heroes. "Well, like I have already informed your husband, we received reports of some problems going on in your neighborhood, and we would like to know if you have heard of anything going on these past few days," he repeated to inform the new present family members. This caused the parents and children to look confused as they tried to remember if anything was wrong, all except for Shinsu, who only seemed to panic even more as an idea began to surface in his mind. Could this be related to Remnant? Obviously he hadn't just stayed in the dark. After their second meeting, Shinsu looked up information in Vigilantes and he found different articles talking about them, from people who saw them as heroes and other who called them reckless. But the main thing was that being one of these illegal heroes, as one reporter put it, was illegal and could lead to long sentences in jail. Could that be what was going on? Has someone reported Remnant and that's why he hasn't been seen since? I'm sorry, but could you be more specific as to what kind of problems have been reported? This time the mother asked as her family also nodded since they also wanted to know. But this time Aizawa, who had yet to speak until now, was the one who answered, giving the family a cold stare. It's nothing too bad, it's about a case of child abuse. These words caused the family to freeze in surprise and then, in fear. Except for Shinsu, who was instead confused. The panic that had taken slight hold of him disappeared slightly, but only left the question, why were they looking into a case of child abuse? For a split second, the words of Remnant rung in his head. I'm going to have to call a friend for help. Don't worry, he's also a hero. Could they be? Well, I'm sorry to tell you, but we have heard of no such cases here, the father said, the kind smile on his face looking a lot more forced than before and a shadow covering his eyes as he stared at the heroes. Aizawa let out a tired sigh as he saw the change in their expressions. He didn't know if he should think of this as a win or not. At the beginning, after hearing the favor Remnant wanted them to do was rather surprising, but it wasn't anything too special. But after the terrifying display the kid gave them and the strange fright he gave the detective, he felt that it might have been a trap or something like that, but he could easily tell that these were just normal people, really shitty people, but normal nonetheless. But he did know the kids, so maybe they had some kind of connection. I'll skip all the formalities, sir. We have already looked into this. The child to your left, Hitoshi Shinsu, was adopted by you a little more than a year ago, and in that time not only has your position in your job skyrocketed, you moved houses into a much more expensive neighborhood, but you know what the most surprising thing was? Aizawa began, showing that the two of them were no fools and that they had done their own homework, causing a shiver to run down the two parents' backs as their expressions began to show more panic. When we talked to your friends and boss, they all said the same thing. They talked about just how good people you were to take in a quirkless mute child into your house, and yet, in the records that we got from his orphanage, not once had those two words ever appeared. With these last words Aizawa's expression darkened as he glared at the wife and husband. Then he turned to look at Shinsu, who cowered at the sudden inattention. So kid, help clear up this mystery, can you talk? The parents turned to look at him, their faces contorted in anger and panic as they sent him a silent message warning him to not open his mouth, and for a second it worked as Shinsu only looked down and shook his head. Aizawa only rolled his eyes at this display. Maybe this will help you, Aizawa said. He hoped it wouldn't have to come to this, but he didn't want to know what that demon brat would do if they didn't get the kid out of this place Remnant sent us. Just those words alone were enough for him to snap his head back up and look at them in surprise. He did it. He fulfilled his promise. A new flame started within Shinsu that consumed all the fear and restraints his adoptive parents had put on him. The exit out of this hell that he had hoped for years to open was right there in front of him. How could he let that door close again? The parents were really confused with Aizawa's last statement, but ignored that when they heard Shinsu talk, louder than he ever had before, as the fires of determination that burned in his heart pushed his forward. I'm not mute and I do have a quirk. The father snapped, the anger in him making his painting his face red as he opened his mouth. You bastache. Stop. Shinsu's words seemed to cut the air around him as the father's eyes suddenly emptied and his body froze, the anger that was in his face disappearing completely. His wife, who had been sitting beside him this whole time and watched as her husband fell under Shinsu's control, paled in fear. One of the main reasons as to why they kept his quirk a secret and made him act like he was mute was because, unlike all the other people, they weren't disgusted by him having a villainous quirk. They were scared. They knew exactly what they had done to him, and if one day he grew tired of the abuse, he could easily control them all like puppets. The two heroes were surprised when they saw the display of power from the kid. Aizawa was rather surprised. A quirk like that would make an amazing hero. He wanted to sigh as he thought about how an annoying vigilante had found such good talent. Well, I guess that settles that. Now then, Shinsu, are you willing to come with us and give us a confession on what has been going on here? Without it we won't be able to do much to help you, he said, seeming completely unfazed by all that had happened in the last few seconds. Shinsu agreed on the spot. Why would he ever say no? With those things finally settled, the two heroes informed him that until everything was settled he would be living with them. This shocked him so much that he had accidentally dropped his control on his adoptive father, but he could care less about them now. Soon enough, for the first time Shinsu went out of that diamond house with a bright smile. Izuku walked once more to the park to talk with Toga after school. He had stopped visiting Shinsu and instead focused on another matter as trusted Aizawa to fulfill his side of the deal. He knew the man very well, and even without intimidating him, he knew that he would have helped Shinsu. He had a soft spot for kids, which is what led to him becoming a kind of parent for most of the class. For now, he wanted to focus on Toga since he now knew more about her and their relationship had grown closer. Now that he knew a lot more about her, he was a lot more confident in changing her future and checking if his small theory was right, but by the time he arrived to the park he was surprised to not see a sign of the girl anywhere. Usually she was the first one here since her school was much closer, so she wouldn't waste as much time walking here as he would, so this was a big surprise to him. He decided to look around. Maybe he had just missed her, or maybe... As the dark idea began to set into his mind, Izuku was overcome with panic. Had he somehow messed things up, and instead of helping mess things up and made her snap sooner than in his original timeline? But if she had killed a student, why would there still be some of those kids in the park? They would have surely heard of the news, or had she attacked a random civilian and gone on the run? More and more of these thoughts ran through his mind as he searched for any sign of the girl in the park, and after not finding anything there he changed his target to the streets around it. In his wild search he had gotten more than a few looks from other passerbys, but he couldn't care less about what they thought as he needed to find his friend. But when he finally got a sight of the girl, his face paled. Toga lay shivering on the ground, her body almost out of view as it was hidden by a large trash can. Her hands were trembling and her complexion was even paler than usual, and she seemed to be muttering something. Izuku hurried to her side as he got to his knees to help her. "Toga, what happened? Are you okay? Did someone hurt you?" With a quick look at her he didn't notice anything wrong with her, like bruises or cuts, so what had happened? She was still slightly conscious, so he helped her sit up, but he was taken aback when she suddenly grabbed his arms, her grip strong enough to turn her knuckles white and even sting a little. "Toga?" Izuku asked, the panic beginning to fade only to leave space for the fear that began to rise up from his stomach. She then looked at him. All the hairs in his body stood straight as if he had been struck by lightning. Memories began to flash before him of all the times he faced against those animalistic eyes. In that moment, her eyes changed from the fun and shy girl he had come to know and changed to the blood-obsessed hunter that he had fought with so many times. Her bright yellow eyes shone with a predatorial gleam as they looked at him like she hadn't eaten anything in years. His instincts were too slow. No, it wasn't his instincts. Those had kicked in a while ago. His body was too slow. He couldn't activate any of the quirks because of the fear of hurting her, and her death grip was too much for his still developing body as she pulled him forward and she lunged at him, fangs bared. She easily pierced his skin. Izuku let out a grunt as she bit the right side of his neck, a little above his shoulder, and he felt a wave of dizziness strike him, almost making him fall to the floor, only if it wasn't for her hold on him. She greedily gulped down his blood almost as if she hadn't drank anything, but she did something that surprised him, her grip on him lightly until she let go of his arms and instead pulled him into a hug, and soon his blood wasn't the only thing staining his clothes as she began to cry. Some part of her was still in there, and she doesn't seem to be willingly doing this, meaning that this is a kind of instinct, but knowing that she was still there and worried about him made this feel a little bit less scary. He weakly hugged her back, one arm wrapping around her and the other stroking her hair as she just continued. There was nothing but silence between them, but even then, she could understand the message he was giving her. "It's okay. I'm here." Hours seemed to pass until she finally let go of his neck and fell asleep on him. Izuku put a hand on his wound as he activated his healing quirks, the bite marks quickly healing until he stopped them. It would be weird if the wound healed so quickly. He sighed when he looked at the two of them. Their clothes were covered in blood and dirt, so if they walked back into the street they would catch everyone's attention, so the best option would be to be more careful. Even if this experience had been rather scary, it had helped Izuku understand a lot more things. Usually Toga would turn into the person they drank their blood from, but she looked exactly the same as before, meaning that she didn't do it for her quirk but more for her instincts. "Guess this proves it," he mumbled. As he activated warp, a large pile of black goo formed in front of him as it then formed into a white box. He opened it to reveal his vigilante outfit. He had hidden the box somewhere in his room where his mother wouldn't check, and with warp he could easily get it anywhere in seconds, but now he placed the red hoodie on Toga and he put on his black mask as he gently held her in a bridal carry since it was the most secure one with what he was about to do. Izuku took a deep breath as his body was covered in red electricity and with a super-powered jump reached the top of the building. You never told us what your theory was about, you know, Fifth said as he appeared next to Izuku. I just wasn't sure, but this is more than enough proof. Izuku easily jumped over the building as he headed to his house. We knew that she definitely had something going on like Shinsu did, and after she finally told me about it an idea came to me. What if her quirk was more complicated than we thought? More complicated? What do you mean? Nana asked. Well, quirks can affect many things of their user. An obvious example are the mutation quirks. Those fully change how a person look like, but to accommodate those changes, their insides must also change, stronger bones, more muscle, simple stuff like that. But they can also change stuff like their tastes. Most people with cat-related mutations tend to like seafood more than the average. But sometimes they can even change the body so much that even their need to survive change, Izuku said. Hold on, Third said, are you saying that her little transformation quirk changed what she needed to survive? Like for example, breathing air? He asked. Yep, a better example would be people with fish mutations. Some can easily survive on land, but there are some that need to stay underwater to live since they can't breathe air like normal humans, he answered back. Okay, I get those. But the girl's quirk isn't a mutation, so it doesn't make much sense, Six said, still not seeing the point. I think I get it, Second suddenly said. You are saying that her quirk has changed her in a way we didn't know, and I can probably guess what it is, Second said with a sly grin. If we considered her strange obsession with blood, the way she calmed down after drinking your blood and her body, like her sharp canines. All those point to a strong relationship to how vampires were described in old folklore in Eastern Europe. Sharp fangs to easily penetrate flesh and drink blood, which is what they feed on since normal food usually didn't give them the nutrients they needed. But vampires have been told to have many other powers except shape-shifting into other people, and she hasn't shown any other power aside from her normal shape-shifting even after her quirk went through an evolution, so this leads us to one. Answer: her quirk is a lot more related to vampires of old than we thought. She may not have the powers, but she has the same needs, so if she has been eating only normal food and not drinking people's blood, she was unknowingly killing herself until today, where she finally succumbed to her instincts and lashed out at you, he finished proudly, but was then confused by the strange looks he got from the other users. What? Fourth let out a small laugh. Nothing, it's just that none of us expected you to know such strange knowledge, says the hermit. Second scoffed and pointed at First. How come I seem weird when I talk about my own interest, but when I first spends hours talking about comics no one says anything? I'm sorry, but my little brother is not weird, he is a nerd. There's a difference, Hisoshi said as a matter of fact. Not helping, First whined. Second wasn't wrong, those had been the same thoughts Izuku had, except for the whole vampire thing. He had thought that maybe one of the reasons she could have lashed out was that she had been suppressing her quirk, thus hurting herself without even knowing it. It then developed after remembering how much she liked blood and how drinking it seemed to make her extremely happy, as if she had eaten her favorite meal. So the theory changed that maybe, because of her quirk, her body didn't change her mentality to have an interest in blood but to have a necessity towards it. Like a lion knows that it needs to eat meat to survive, her body knew that she needed blood, but she only kept ignoring those cravings until it finally was too much and she snapped. But after he interfered and helped her gain trust in someone she could be herself, she must have subconsciously let go of her restraints, and it caused it all to collapse on her. Thankfully the one who found her was him and not another person, as things could have gone much worse. With the sun setting behind him, he finally arrived to the front door of his home. With his arms busy with the girl, he used Black Whip to take his mask off and knock on the door. Blood had started to pour again from his wounds because he didn't fully heal them, and all of the strain his body was put under with One for All and the strengthening quirks he used. So when he saw his mother open the door, he felt the exhaustion finally hit him as he let out a tired sigh. Izuku, it's really late. Where have you been, Izuku? She had been worried as he had been coming back later these past few weeks, but he had never come home so late. But the worries about him being late disappears the moment she saw him with an open wound in his neck that dyed half of his clothes red and carrying an unconscious girl that was just as covered in blood as he was. Hey Mom, I made a friend, he said with a weak smile. Many things happened in the next few seconds, and it took Izuku more than a few minutes to put all the memories in an understandable timeline, most likely because of the blood loss. After he finally arrived home and gave his mother the closest thing to a heart attack she's ever had, she dragged the two blooded kids inside and set them both On the couch, Toga still sleeping soundly and Izuku barely holding on to consciousness. She then quickly checked on her child and quickly wrapped the injury on his neck and let him rest since he had gone ghostly pale, and placed a blanket over the girl before bombarding him with questions. He then explained what it was that he had been doing in the afternoon to his mom, how he went to meet Toga and they soon became friends. Of course, he also explained everything that had happened to the girl too. Inko let out a tired sigh as she looked at her child, his neck wrapped in bandages, his skin still pale but much better than before, and then the girl who was staining her sofa with her own son's blood. After hearing the entire story, she had a bittersweet taste in her mouth. She had always wanted her son to make friends, but not like this. She once again looked at the smile on her son. It was small and fragile, but it was obvious that he was truly happy, and that only managed to cause her heart to ache. She had known that Izuku had stopped making friends and that even at some point Bakugo had also left him. How could she not know? Izuku was her son. She could easily tell that something was wrong, the way the light in his eyes had dimmed, his smile becoming more forced, or the way he dodged her questions. And yet, she did nothing. With all those signs staring right at her, she did nothing. Maybe it was the fear of finally acknowledging the fact that she didn't know what to do, that this was completely out of her control, and she instead decided to live a lie in which everything was fine. But she knew, oh she knew, the stress of her blissful ignorance put on her son, who tried his best to keep the lie up all for her. And just like those signs, she had also noticed the new ones. The way one day Izuku came back with a completely different aura around him, the way he carried himself was filled with confidence, finally standing straight and looking ahead, the smile in his face, although tired, felt so much more honest than before, the glimmer in his eyes that made him seem older than he is. If he didn't have his face or his small little things like his muttering, she would have believed that this was a whole different person. All she could do was wonder what had happened to such a drastic change to happen to her small child. When she looked at this new Izuku, she felt proud. She was so happy to see her child turn to a better and happier leaf, but at the same time she couldn't help but feel like she was being left behind, like he was rushing towards a goal of his own and she could only watch his back disappear in the horizon. Until now she had done nothing to help her son, and now he had found a strength to push himself forward. Even if it was late, even if it did little, she wanted to push him forward a little. Izuku, dear, I think it's better if you go to sleep. I'll keep an eye on her, she said. He must feel tired from the blood loss and she needed time to think about a lot of things, so wrapping things here for now would be for the better. Izuku, who was indeed tired, just nodded as he walked to his room. When he finally arrived, the other vestiges appeared and he flopped onto his bed, letting out a groan as all the exhaustion caught up to him, but he couldn't help the smile that crept up to his face. I did it. Shinsu being taken out of his abusive home early, being friends with Toga, these were the changes he had been striving for the entire time, and after a lot of exhausting work he finally accomplished them. They were small when compared to the rest, but they were the base to his plan that he needed. I'm quite impressed. You managed to change their lives in what, a little less than a year. His father was with his usual Cheshire smile, but this time he didn't feel angry by it. He was tired and proud of himself. He had already done so much in a short time. If he continued with this pace, who knows how far he could get. Hey, let's not get too far ahead of ourselves here. We aren't completely done with the Toga problem. Don't you think that her parents might try and file a missing persons report? Said Third, which were understandable concerns, but Izuku had no way to check since he didn't know where she lived, so all they could do was pray and hope that nothing happens. Another problem is, where is she going to stay? Nana asked, which brought a hold to the conversation. Right now, as he sat back up, Izuku realized how little he had thought things through. He had not thought about a place for her to stay. The problem was at home, so it would be dangerous for her to go back. Getting her adopted into another family could cause the same thing that happened to Shinsu to happen to her, and just abandoning her is out of the picture. And what about her need for blood? Asked Second. Oh God, what about her need for blood? He couldn't just keep feeding her on his own or letting her starve until she snapped again. Can he get blood from the hospital, or did he need to steal it? Since he didn't have much information to begin with, the plan he had made was shaky at best, and now with the factor of family problems and her needing to feed on blood, that plan had begun to crumble. Suddenly a headache sent him falling back down onto his bed. Maybe the blood loss was affecting him pretty badly. You should take a break. Those healing quirks heal wounds, but they don't give you back the blood that you spill. Izuku decided to ignore the dark undertones of that and take an actual break for once and let his eyes close. By the time Izuku woke up, the sun was already shining through the curtains, and if it wasn't for the loose bandages around his neck he would have forgotten about yesterday's incident. He walked into the kitchen to see his mother and Toga happily talking together with cups of tea in their hands. She must have spent the night here since she is still wearing the blanket around her shoulders. "Good morning, Izu," his mother was the first one to notice him. Toga followed along with her own quiet greeting but didn't look at him directly. "We still need to talk about something, so let's sit down," his mother said, and they all followed as they sat in the living room. Toga still didn't look at him, her expression covered by regret as she looked at her hands in her lap. "While you were sleeping, Toga gave me her own side of the story, and while I am proud of you about helping someone, I would have preferred if it wasn't in such a dangerous way," his mother said, and Izuku smiled while he nodded as he hoped that she never found out about his vigilante persona. "Now, do you have an idea of what to do next?" she asked, but by her tone of voice he could already feel like she knew the answer. No, I just acted without thinking," he admitted, and his mother just nodded. "Toga, how would you feel staying with us?" she asked with a sweet smile, but both Izuku and Toga looked at her shocked. What do you mean?" Izuku asked, confused by her words. "Well, after she told me about the problems in her home, I started to think about different ways to help her. We can't send her back, that would be horrible. Helping her get into an adoptive family could lead into the same situation happening again or something worse happening to her. So I thought that after everything, this would be a good place for her." She turned to look directly at Toga with a soft expression. "What do you say, dear? Do you want to be a Midoriya?" Both teens stayed silent for a few seconds. Toga was shocked at the offer and was at the brink of tears, but Izuku was actually surprised at both her offer but also at how much she had thought the situation. "Don't underestimate your own mother, son, because I can tell you that you didn't get your brains from me," his father said, looking proud as if he was the one that gave the idea. "Wow, hearing you admit to something is really weird. Are you really the brother I know?" asked first, but Hisoshi just laughed. "Oh, little brother, you should already know my type of woman. I won't take anyone that can't reach my high standards," Hisoshi said as he looked at his wife with a wistful look. "But I guess you did always say she was smarter than you," first muttered, but it was more than enough to make both of their faces take a sadder look. Izuku didn't know why or what that meant, since it didn't feel like that last part was about his mother. Maybe he should ask about it later. Is it really okay to have me here?" Toga asked, tears at the edge of falling and her hands shaking as they gripped the edges of the blanket around her. "Of course, I would need to get a job since the money your father sends us won't be enough for 3 people, but it shouldn't be too much of a problem and you don't have to worry about your blood problems. Your quirk isn't the only one that needs you to consume blood. We can easily get you a prescription for it," she said, reassuring Toga of her worries, but of course there was still something left. "What about Izuku?" Toga opened and closed her mouth multiple times before turning to look at Izuku, tears on the edge of falling as her eyes shone with a whole new bright light. For some reason, looking at the frail and hopeful Toga that looked at him with wide eyes that looked more like those of a lonely stray kitten, a version of her he had never hoped to see, one that he would have almost thought impossible to even exist, it made the last fragments of the image of his past Toga finally fall apart. He smiled and warmly said, "Welcome to the family." Toga couldn't hold back anymore as she finally started to cry at the new life that she was offered. Thank you," was all she could say as Izuku and Inko both embraced her in the warmest and softest hug she's ever had in her life. Izuku was still going over the events that had happened earlier today. He had gotten a sibling, and it was someone who was supposed to be his enemy. This was most definitely not in his plan, but he couldn't really say that it was a bad development. This version of Toga had been growing on him for a while, and he was more than glad to know that her future is secured to be a good one. Please, stop." A man who was now laying on a pool of his own blood pleaded. His body, which was frozen like a statue, couldn't stop the incoming blade as it pierced their head, killing them in the spot. Izuku clicked his tongue at the sight. He had forgotten just how messy his kills were. "Are you going to keep watching or do you need something?" the man with the various blade weapons said, his blood-red scarf fluttering in the cold night wind, his ugly face turning to look at Izuku, who was wearing a different outfit tonight as his usual one was dirty. This time, he was wearing a black hoodie making his silhouette mix with the shadows, a dark blue face mask, and, even if they were still stained in blood, his weighted gloves, knee pads and his steel-toed shoes. "You took your time with that one. guess you're not as good as they say," Izuku jokingly said as his eyes shone with a slight red hue as he looked down at the infamous hero killer. "Stain." The man just glared at Izu. "You are a mere child. I suggest that you leave if you know what's good for you," he simply said. Izuku tilted his head. "You haven't heard of me?" he asked. "As if I should care about a child in costume that will soon get themselves killed." Stain then liked the remaining blood of his sword, ignoring Izuku as he was just another ant in his path to fixing this broken world. "And here I was hoping we could get a nice little conversation before we began," Izuku said before he turned into a red lightning as he shot down. Stain sensed the incoming attack as quickly dodged back as a downward kick hit right where he had stood, making a small crater on the floor. "Not bad," was all Izuku said as he looked at the villain who now stood with his weapons drawn looking intensely at the young vigilante. A moment ago, when he looked at the kid, he could feel no kind of danger from him, so he had chosen to ignore him, but after his first strike, that child's entire aura changed as if he was a sword that had been drawn from its scabbard. He could feel that this kid wasn't normal. In the alley that both of them stood in, under the watchful eye of the moon, they both knew that only one person was coming out of there alive. Izuku and Stain stared at each other in silence as they waited for the other to do the first move. Stain knew he couldn't underestimate that child. The speed and strength of his attack was not normal at all. It had even cracked the floor underneath him. If it had actually hit him, then he would have been badly injured, or even worse, he would need to give it his everything for this fight. Izuku was in his younger body, and only with the strengthening quirks could he use about 3% of OFA, but now he could not only use the other vestiges quirks but also the ones within AFO, and he had decided to wait for a better time to begin testing them out, and now it seemed like a perfect time to test a few combinations that he had in mind. In short, he was going to fight not with quality but with quantity. He was the first one to move as he shot towards the villain in a zigzag pattern, using the walls to boost his own jumps. Stain was no half-baked villain. He had already fought and killed multiple heroes, so his senses were top-notch, so when Izuku finally reached him with a fist ready, he was able to dodge it with a backflip, but the kid then did something that shocked him. From his knuckles, he sent out two long tendrils of black energy that wrapped around his leg, and just as he was about to twist it to get out of its grip, did they begin to shine with red cracked lines, and from the tendrils another bunch of them shot out like thorns that dug into his leg, making escape impossible. Black whip and rivet stab. Then with a swing, Stain was dragged through the air and smashed to the ground face first, but Izuku wasn't done as he pulled again, dragging the villain against the floor, and with a boosted jump, flew into the air, dragging him along before spinning in the air and throwing him up. He then chased after him with great speed, almost as if he was running on air, and then went for another swing at him. Float and airwalk. Seeing the incoming attack, Stain twisted his body, making the fist only scratch his cheek. With another great display of flexibility did he contort his body to then use Izuku's as a propulsion board as he jumped away, landing on the roof of another building as he began to run away. Izuku sent out Bullwhip and latched onto the building as he chased after the villain. The clouds of smoke they passed by filling his nose with ash and dust. In the distance he could hear the cries of people and the laughs of rampaging villains. Stain quickly turned around and grimaced as he saw that Izuku followed closely. He then took out 3 of his knives and threw them at the boy, but this proved ineffective as he easily dodged them. Things like that were easy for him to dodge when compared to Stain's future self, and all for one who were on completely different ranks than this version of the villain, so fighting him was nothing more than a chore for him. Izuku's legs then suddenly were the main focus of the red lighting as he suddenly released a sudden burst of kinetic energy to fly forward and tackle Stain, making them fall back down into the streets. Fa Jin and spring-like limbs. Izuku jumped back as Stain tried to swing one of his swords at him but managed to evade it thanks to danger sense. He then quickly used smokescreen to create a moment for him to breath, but it didn't last long as the villain threw more knives at him, which Izuku was able to dodge with danger sense or catch with black whip. The villain then rushed at him from the smoke and barely dodged his strike, which managed to cut a bit of his suit but thankfully didn't penetrate his skin. Izuku followed Stain's movements thanks to infrared and search, making the smoke barely a problem for him, then rushed at the villain, making him go on the defense, but with a kick he managed to break one of his swords and make him take a few steps back. Stain could barely believe his eyes. This kid was already a threat to him with that strength and speed, but adding every other trick that he just kept pulling out, he started to think that his chances to win were becoming slimmer, and he had yet to even get a single cut on him, making his quirk completely useless. And now that there was a cloud of smoke, he had to rely fully on his other senses to try and figure out where the next attack would come from. Izuku and Stain seemed to reach a standstill as the villain kept on the defensive as he only dodged the attacks from the vigilante, both fighters having reached a middle point as they both tried to land a single strike on the other. When the smoke finally dispersed, both villain and hero were tired. Izuku had been using Danger Sense multiple times to dodge all of Stain's slashes since he knew that it would be his end if even one of them reached him, causing him a pounding headache. Stain had already lost 2 more of his knives as they were shattered to pieces, and even with his own stamina, he could feel how the injuries he had sustained were already taking a toll on him. They both stared at the other, anger clear on their expressions. Stain couldn't believe that he had been cornered like a rat so easily. Izuku, on the other hand, just wanted to finish this off as quickly as possible. As memories of Ida and his brother flashed in his mind, he needed to remember that his fight wasn't just for him. Izuku rushed forward, jumping from wall to wall again around Stain, leaving only a trail of red sparks, but he didn't immediately attack as he tried to confuse his enemy. Stain was barely keeping up with the vigilante as he bounced around him as he waited for a moment to strike. He was trying to purge this world of those corrupt heroes, so he wasn't going to be stopped by a mere child. A black tendril shot forward, aiming at his leg once more, but he managed to dodge it with a jump. But Izuku appeared behind him in sparks of red and black, just realizing that he had been tricked. Izuku then pulled back his legs as it expanded and pared back his muscles, making the red lighting center around it as he delivered a quick and powerful kick to his back that released an immense shockwave that made the ground around them shake and the windows burst thanks to the explosion of energy that sent the villain flying into the sky with a sickening crack from his back. This was Izuku's most powerful combination as of now. Fa Jin, kinetic boosters, spring-like limbs, hypertrophy, though muscles, and air cannon. Stain could barely breathe as the kick had expelled all of the air in his lungs, and the pain that shot through his body made his mind go blank for a few seconds. But when he finally came back and tried to move, he discovered something that made his face pale. He couldn't feel his legs. That BSA had done something to his spine, and no matter how hard he tried, he just couldn't make his legs move, and he could only glance back at the ground as he crashed against the ground with a loud splat. Izuku slowly approached the now disfigured body. That's right, even now he was still alive, but only barely. His arms and legs were bent and broken that he could see the bones jutting out of his own skin. A puddle of blood began to slowly grow around him, his ribcage obviously also in bad condition as his skin fell into his body in some parts of his chest as it tried to go up and down only to fail multiple times. His hair stuck to his head because of the sweat and blood that covered it. One of his lungs must have been pierced as he coughed up blood. His eyes looked at him in a combination of anger and fear at the person who had managed to toy with him like he was nothing. Izuku's eyes, now cold and with a dangerous edge, shone a ruby red as he looked at the pitiful remains of the greatest killer in front of him, and when compared to the mad grin that passed his past Stain had before he killed him after taking one of Ida's arms, then this was a very obvious downgrade. "Can't feel anything down from your hips, can you?" Izuku asked as he crouched in front of the villain, his voice cold and monotone. "That's poetic justice. I bet that's how he felt, useless, pathetic, scared, probably even worse as that was his quirk. But look at you, the great hero killer, taken by, how did you put it, right, a mere child." Izuku then took a deep breath, ignoring the scent of blood as he mentally scratched a name off his list, but when he opened them again he noticed something strange. Right on Stain's chest was a small ball of light. It was flickering in and out of existence as if saying that it didn't have long before it died. For some reason, when Izuku saw the small light he felt empty, 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 empty. Empty, 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 empty. That intense feeling of emptiness completely overcame Izuku and took over his mind as he panicked as the feeling only became more and more ingrained in him. He didn't want it. What was missing? What was it? Izuku could barely breathe as panic began to overtake him as he tried to figure out just what that hole inside of him wanted as it made his sin itch. And then, it suddenly dawned on him. That light. That's the answer. And he knew just how to get it. His hand was then sparked with black electricity as he put it on Stain's head almost as if in a trance. He saw how from his hands came multiple red strings that then wrapped around the small light and he pulled. Stain, with the last bit of air he had in him, began to let out wails of pain as he felt himself be torn apart, and his eyes locked with Izuku's, their cold, emotionless red as he looked at him. The screaming seemed to continue for hours as Izuku kept pulling at the light until finally more red strings wrapped around it until it was in his hands where it melted into him, finally filling that hole that had scared him. The feeling was ecstatic. It was as if a part of him had been missing for years and he had finally found it, and he just couldn't help the stupid laugh that bubbled out of him in relief. With all of this happening, he had never even noticed the silence that reigned in the night, the screaming having ceased, making his laugh the only thing filling the air. Stain was dead. Izuku had won. And he had taken his quirk. His eyes slowly turned back to the soft green they were, but at the same time it all began to fall down on him. He had taken his quirk. He had taken his quirk. Before he could fully process it, the sounds of sirens reached his ears. Shit, someone must have heard their fight and called the cops. He couldn't stay, he needed to leave. Izuku hurried as he began running away, not even giving the scene a glance as his mind tried to process everything only to go blank. He only realized that he was home when he climbed through the window of his room, and he finally fell to the floor on his knees as he felt both the exhaustion and guilt hit him at once. Isaac first tried to say but was stopped by the mental scream that Izuku released. He couldn't wake up anyone in his house or his cover would be blown. Why? Why did that happen? What did I do? He screamed in his mind. I didn't expect that kind of backlash, Hisoshi muttered, catching everyone's attention, and when he realized, he sighed. His usual smile was gone and replaced with a more serious expression. Until now, all you had done was use the quirks within my quirk, not AFO itself, but today, you could say that it wanted attention and thus made itself known. He then put a hand under his chin as he continued. One of the backlash of my quirk was that it was greedy. It always asked me for more, but to me, it was almost akin to normal hunger, just a small itch here and there. But when both AFO and OFA combined, just like the other quirks, it was strengthened. My body was not fit to control quirks of the newer generations, but you can, and that, combined with the power boost from OFA, only made it want more. What you felt must have been that same backlash I went through, only a few times worse, changing it from simple hunger to making you feel as if a piece of you was missing. Izuku looked at his blood-stained hands. They were trembling. How? How long will I feel like this? Like an unfinished puzzle? He asked as he swallowed back the fear. Hisoshi only looked down with a sad expression. Until the moment you take your last breath. Izuku was horrified at himself, but it wasn't because he had killed a man. No, he had done that multiple times already. What scared him so badly was just how much he had enjoyed it. The feeling of happiness after taking that light, how relief had washed over him in such a dark moment. Before any of the other vestiges could say anything, he slowly stood up and with trembling legs carefully walked through the house until he reached the bathroom. He looked in the mirror. He didn't know who the person in the reflection was. It was someone else entirely, someone who looked like him but wasn't. This person held darker eyes. His previous green eyes were now sunken and had dark lines among the creases and folds. He ran a hand through his green hair. In the mess of it he could see a few new white hairs, so thin and almost invisible that if you weren't looking for them you would never find them. After a while, he was no longer looking at his hair but at himself. Tears rushed down his face. He hated it. He hated it so much that he knew that this was only the beginning as he looked at the person who he had become and at the one he had yet to become. The morning he woke up, Izuku grimaced at the morning news as they played on the TV as they all ate breakfast. We inform everyone that last night, the infamous hero killer Stain, identified as Chozome Akaguro, has been found dead after an anonymous tip relating to the villain being involved in a fight with a mysterious figure who police believe to be the mysterious vigilante that has been roaming the streets. Then they proceeded to show pictures of the last alley in which they finished their battle, the deep crater on the floor, the dry blood and the broken windows. Stain. I feel like I have heard that name before, Himiko said as she kept eating. Izuku wasn't really surprised at this. If he remembered correctly, it was the message that Stain should have given in the future that brought forth a bunch of different villains from hiding, she being one of them, and they joined the league as they believe him to be part of it. But now, since no one saw his speech and both Shigaraki nor Stain should know each other, things might have changed by a great deal. Izuku didn't like it, but he would need to prepare for anything that might change in the future, because changing Shinsa's or Himiko's future was one thing but killing Stain was another. This is probably one of the biggest changes he has made until now. You probably heard of him in the news. He's famous for having taken down the most heroes, but it seems that his record has been cut short, Izuku said. The news made him feel nervous. He had hoped that maybe the police would have thought that maybe of the millions of people who hated the villain would have come to take revenge. He didn't expect them to pin the crime so quickly on him. Maybe telling the detective that he was related to AFO was a bad idea. No, it was the right thing to do, even if it put a target on remnants. Last time, All Might had let his guard down after he thought that he had killed AFO. Yeah, he still doubted his actual death, but now, they were sure that he was alive, so that meant that they would prepare better when he made his move. Those are rather dark news to begin the day with, his mother complained, but then smiled as she turned to her new daughter. Anyway, Himiko, how are you feeling? Are you settling in well? Do you need anything? His mother asked. I'm really good. Even though I've only been here for a few days, it already feels much better than my old home. But are you sure I'm not causing you any trouble? She asked once more. Oh, not at all, dear. The only problem would be the money, but I can easily get a job with my years of experience, his mother answered. Right, he had forgotten about that. His mother was getting a job, something she had never done last time, so he was a little curious. What job are you going to get? I'll just take up my old job as a lawyer. You were a lawyer? Izuku and Himiko both asked, making Inko laugh. Yes, actually it was in one of my cases where I met you, father, she said with a bright smile. What? Izuku asked in surprise. Oh no, his father said, the panic obvious in his voice. You were put on trial? First screamed. And you didn't get the death sentence? Nana complained. For your knowledge, I wasn't the one on trial, I was just trying to get a job to hide my identity. His father tried to defend himself, but as his voice became quieter and quieter, it was obvious that he didn't have many excuses. All right, fine. It was after one of my fights when Shimura was still alive and I didn't have that big of an evil empire, and since I had changed my actual name multiple times, I had nowhere to go and needed money. Did you? Were you a lawyer? You know Jack's hit about law. You had an arts degree. First continued. Oh, so now the English major is trying to chew me out. Why don't you go read Hamlet or something? Hisashi answered back. That's around the point where Izuku turned out of their argument as the two continued bickering and focused back on his mom. I was preparing for a case which I thought could be a challenge, as I was going against another lawyer who I had never heard of, but when it came down to it I was actually surprised when he didn't even know some of the most simple things, which ended with him losing the arguments and his client deemed guilty. His mother laughed as she recalled the face of defeat and shocked from her husband, but I was even more surprised when he asked me out to eat. There he confessed to me that he actually lied to get the job and that he had no idea what he was doing. It was a really weird encounter, but we continued to meet up and he would tell me all these different jobs that he would take, and one thing lead to another and we ended together. Now he has a job overseas, but he still sends us money. Izuku was surprised at this. In his past life he never learned much about his father, so hearing this was already new to him. But he shouldn't focus on that, because since today he didn't have school, they were going to focus on his new sister. Since only Izuku and his mom have lived in this house, they don't have all the necessities to take in someone else. They need clothes, more food, and they will have to move his room to make space for her too. But first, it itches, Himiko complained as Izuku pushed away her hand as she tried to scratch her head as he and his mother applied the dye onto her hair. They had bought the green-haired dye for her yesterday, and today was finally the day they got to work on her hair. Their mother was the one that did the most in this part, as he had never done this before, but by the time they were done he was able to instead use all of the skill he got from playing dress-up with Ai to make the two buns he had seen her with before. Wow, Izuku! This is my favorite hairstyle. How did you know? She asked as she looked at her green hair in the mirror. Izuku only laughed. The day then seemed to fly by. They went to different clothing stores to find clothes for her. They tested different mattresses to see which one she would like. During the entire time there was a strange feeling inside Izuku's chest. It was something that he had not experienced in a long time, something that he had thought that he could never experience again. Izuku! A familiar voice called out. "What are you staring into space for, you nerd?" A rough yet warm voice said. "Come on, the others are waiting." A warm hand suddenly grabbed onto his own, her soft pink pads on her finger brushing against his scarred hand. He looked up and saw Ochiko's bright smile. Behind her was the rest of his class, all smiling at him. They were all walking around the plaza. It was the time before they went to the camp, and the first time he had ever done this with people he could honestly call friends. "Izuku," Himiko said, bringing him back to the present. She tilted her head looking at him with a small smile on her face. He apparently had stopped walking when he got stuck in his own old memories. Old memories? Could he even call them memories anymore? Those events might never even happen because of his actions, and those memories were from a timeline that might not even exist. In all honesty, these memories of times gone are nothing but a curse now. So maybe... Izuku wiped away the small tears that had gathered in his eyes and answered her smile with his own. "Sorry, I got lost in thought." He walked faster to catch up to them. "Maybe it's time to make some new ones." Izuku let out a sigh. Today had been a much more exciting day than he had expected. Walking around town with his family, going in and out of stores, it made him feel so normal, like he wasn't some time traveler from a terrible future. It was nice. But now all he wanted was to take a nice long rest, as tomorrow he would need to go back to school and actually begin to deal with Bakugo. He slowly opened the door and stepped inside, his feet causing a wet slap as he stepped on some kind of puddle. "Hey!" Only then did he realize that this wasn't his room. In front of him lay an entirely different world. The sky above him pitch black, not a single star could be seen above him, but in front of him were many things. Bodies. Corpses. All covered in blood, as their lifeless bodies made up the land, their white and empty eyes staring into nothing, but they made him feel as if thousands of little needles were stabbing him. He turned around to open the door and run, but behind him was nothing. The door was gone, leaving only the red and black wasteland to expand endlessly in front of him. Where am I?" He asked nobody in particular. Just a moment ago he had been in his own home, so how come he was now in a completely different world? Wait, didn't something like this happen before? A nightmare. That must be it. He was just having a nightmare again. He'll wake up any time soon. All of this isn't real, and it doesn't matter? That's what you wanted to say, right? A voice said behind Izuku, which sent a shiver down his entire body. It wasn't scary or threatening, it was actually monotone, not showing a single hint of emotion. The reason it filled him with such fear was because it was his voice. He slowly turned around and was shocked to see another him, the older version of him to be more specific. His messy hair pulled back in a small ponytail, his sharp cold dark green eyes looked at him with no emotions. He was at least 2 heads taller than him, and the green hero suit that was stained in blood only made him look more menacing. What are you?" Izuku asked, his voice trembling. "What a stupid question. I'm you," the older Izuku answered, but that's when he noticed, it wasn't exactly his voice, it was thousands of other voices all speaking at the same time. Where are we?" Izuku asked as he looked down. His feet were inside a small puddle of blood, but around them the ground was made of thousands of dead bodies, but he didn't recognize a single one of them. "This place? It's a place made of your own guilt. These are the bodies of the people you couldn't save, the ones who lost their lives waiting for a hero to appear and save them, only to drown in despair as they realized that no one was coming," older Izuku explained, the 1,000 voices inside him making every word he said echo. A heavy weight began to press on Izuku's chest as he heard the other version speak. The people he couldn't save. The ones he let down. But no one's dead yet. I got another chance. I can save them. I can. Izuku was cut off by the sudden hand that wrapped around his neck and lifted him into the air, making him choke. "And you think that exempts you from your own sins? You're just making excuses." And you know that older Izuku kept his strong hold on Izuku even as he clawed at his gloved hand, his expression never changing. "You may have gone back in time, but that doesn't mean that you can't make the same mistakes again." Older Izuku then began to walk, holding Izuku in front of him to look at him straight in the eyes as he continued, "You got another chance, and yet look at what you've accomplished. You helped Shinsu and one of your past enemies. Congrats. But he is still alive. Even as we talk, he is controlling and killing people, all because you thought that friendship was more important. You are wasting precious time. Do you think that you can make those people your friends if they are dead? As he kept walking, Izuku noticed that the deeper they went into the empty land, the more corpses he recognized. At first they were just some heroes that he remembered having seen in the news, but soon they became the one he remembered that had helped him, like Hawks or Endeavor. Their empty eyes only made the weight in his chest become heavier. People died and will die because of your fall, so use this chance to win. That last word was the first one that his other self said with any hint of emotion, and it was anger. You can't afford to lose because so many people died already to pave your way with their corpses, and if you lose that would render their sacrifices meaningless. His voice only got louder and louder as his eyes began to take a red color and the grip on his neck tightened. In the floor under their feet he saw his teacher, Mr. Aizawa, Midnight, heroes that had tried to protect him and his class. You can't lose because you are the only one who remembers the tears they shed, the blood they spilled, the hopes they left for you to carry, and if you lose, who will make them come true, who will make that brighter future that they died fighting for? His friends, Uraraka, Ida, Bakugo, he just stepped over them as if they were nothing more than stepping stones for him. So stop being a coward and walk through the blood and scale your way up with their bodies. Your hands are already dyed red with their blood, so who cares if they get even more dirty? Then his family, his mom, All Might, their faces so horribly empty that they made a whimper come from his mouth. Bare your teeth, a beast is better than a dead man and a villain is better than a dead hero. Finally, he stopped, leaving Izuku hanging over a massive pit that led to an endless abyss. Izuku had stopped struggling and could only let the tears roll down his face as pathetic whimpers escaped his throat. He looked at his other self, whose face was now contorted with anger, his red eyes looking at him as if he was nothing more than a pathetic insect. Whatever you do, whatever you become. He let go and Izuku plummeted, but his voice still reached his ears as if he was right in front of him. You cannot lose. Izuku only realized the consequences of his actions when he finally went back to school, even though he had a pounding headache from last night's nightmare. The news about Stain's death had spread like wildfire since he kept hearing people talk about it all over his school, and he wasn't sure if he liked the responses. Many were really happy to have someone so dangerous out of the picture, but the news that a mysterious vigilante was the one that took it out made some doubt the ability of the heroes, since they had already been chasing after the villain for a long time. Another drawback that only Izuku knew about was that soon many other villains would begin to pop up, all thanks to Stain's inspiration, but the good thing is that since this time he didn't have any connections to the League, the villains would be running around like headless chickens instead of gathering around one point. Okay, so we got rid of Stain really early, changed the vampire girl's fate and helped your purple-haired friend. You've still got a little more than a year before you go to UA, so that leads me to ask, what's next? Asked first as Izuku walked through his school. Well, one of them would be to try and fix my relationship with Bakugo, since that was something we kind of just left unresolved. As much as I would like to try and save A, right now, even with the extra quirks, I don't think I am a challenge for either Overhaul or his thugs, so that will have to come later. Izuku then fell into deep silence as he thought about a small idea that had been growing in the back of his mind. How are we going to get into UA? His question made the others raise an eyebrow, since the answer was obvious. Well, by doing the entrance exam, said Third, but Izuku just shook his head. Before I was able to take the exam because All Might gave me one for all, but we already decided that taking it again would be a bad idea, since we don't know what could happen to you or me if I had a second copy of it, and I think that since I am planning to be friends with Bakugo again and the new family member, I feel that the excuse of getting my quirk in the middle of the exam won't hold up. Izuku then stopped as he continued exploring the idea. Last time, he and All Might had gone with the excuse of him getting his quirk in the middle of the exam when he blew the zero-pointer away, but back then Bakugo didn't pay him attention and it was only him and his mom, but now there was going to be a lot more eyes on him, and suddenly getting a quirk, and one that had nothing to do with his family, would call too much attention. So maybe. So what you are saying is that you want to get your quirk earlier than last time to not call as much attention as you did before. That's a good start, but what are you going to use as your quirk? And when would be a good time to suddenly reveal it, because just waking up and saying I got a quirk doesn't sound any better, said Nana, and Izuku agreed that she was right. Choosing a quirk and time was really important, since it could either make the lie more believable or completely break it. And really only one moment came to his mind. What do we have here? You'll make a perfect skin suit for me to hide in, kid. He always wanted to get the chance to get back at that sludge villain, and that would be the perfect moment to do it. Now the other question would be his quirk. It needs to be something that fits his story, and since his mother could attract weak object which would fall into the category of telekinesis and his father could breath fire, then Izuku got a bitter smile as he thought of the answer. Todoroki will not be happy. So now, how does he get that kind of quirk? Is there one in the list, or maybe he could try and force an Evo? Deku! Bakugo suddenly slammed his hand on his desk, snapping Izuku out of his thoughts. When did he get to his classroom? How long was he spacing out? Anyway, right now that doesn't matter because someone finally got enough confidence to move. You and I are going to have a little talk, got it? Bakugo ordered, leaving no place for rejection, but Izuku just gave him a cold look. In his red eyes those usual flames of anger were a lot dimmer, a good beginning. Izuku then stood up and followed Bakugo through the school in silence, the other students looking at him with sneers in their faces as they probably imagined how he was going to get beaten into a crying mess. Bakugo then led him to the back of the school where he stood glaring at him, and Izuku just gave him an uninterested look. What the hell happened? Bakugo asked, which only confused Izuku. What are you talking about? Izuku asked back. You know what I'm talking about, you changed, so what the hell happened? Bakugo clarified. He wanted answers and Izuku could guess why. In all truth, Bakugo knew him better than anyone, even his own mother, and a sudden change in his personality like this would definitely catch his attention. Nothing happened, Bakugo. I just got tired of being pushed around and decided to take my life in my own hands. That's all, Izuku simply said, but Bakugo didn't seem to like the answer as he clenched his fists. Then you are just idiot, he begins, a different kind of anger in his face, not the one he showed when he put him in his place as just a stepping stone for him, but instead something more personal. I already said it, so who cares? You can't do anything. You may be smart, but you are weak and quirkless. You'd get killed in seconds. Bakugo kept pushing him against the wall with every remark. Usually he would tower above him, but now with the growth that Izuku has gone through they now stood on equal ground, both staring at each other's eyes. Bakugo's words, while angry, they also hid a small sense of worry. He actually cared about his own safety. It was a nice feeling, but he sure went the wrong way trying to show it. I won't get killed. I know what I am doing, Bakugo, Izuku answered back, the challenge obvious in high voice. Bakugo let out a laugh as he glared at the determined and unmoving Izuku. You totally know, I can already see it. You'll write about their quirk in your book until they get bored and leave. His hands began to spark, giving him a more intimidating presence. Just accept it, you idiot. You can't be a hero. Izuku had enough. After school, follow me and I'll prove to you that I can be a hero, he said, this time pushing the blonde boy back, making him take a step back. Fine, I can't wait to see the face you make when you finally understand, Bakugo said with a grin as he left. The rest of classes went by normally until the bell finally rang as everyone began to leave. Bakugo gave him a final glance before he left. Izuku was the last one to leave the empty classroom, but before he finally walked out a figure appeared behind him. They looked out the window of their classroom with a wistful expression. It was the older version of him again, his ruby-colored eyes shining as he spoke, and even when not looking at him his voice was as loud as ever. Keep wasting time like this and I'll have to take things into my own hands. Izuku quickly turned around, startled by the voice, but when he turned to the window the other version of him was already gone, leaving him with that warning bouncing around his ears. Why the hell are we here? Bakugo asked as he looked at the place Izuku had brought him. It was a beach, just that, nothing special, and at this hour there weren't even that many people. Yeah, the view was really pretty, but that was it. It's Takoba Beach. As you can see, it's a seaside park, but the thing is that the place was abandoned after trash began to pile up, and because of that more and more trash just continued to pile up over the years, Izuku explained. Bakugo just tilted his head. The place looked spotless, so how could it have been covered in trash? And if they did clean up the trash, then he was pretty sure that someone would have talked about it. Izuku let out a small laugh as he could hear the cogs turn in Bakugo's head, but he decided to show him instead, so he pulled out his phone and showed him a picture. It's just trash, Bakugo answered, and he wasn't wrong. The image just showed a large pile of trash and a small amount of sand underneath it. It's a photo of the park from a year ago. The news seemed to shock Bakugo as he turned to look at the photo and the clean beach. Okay, but what does this have to do with you proving to me that you can be a hero? Bakugo asked. While the change in the beach did surprise him, it didn't really mean anything to him. I was the one who cleaned it, Izuku simply stated, but it was more than enough to surprise the blonde boy again. Excuse me? You effing cleaned all of that? Bakugo pretty much screamed in his ear and he nodded. Yep, it was for my training. Why do you think I got this growth spurt? Izuku said with a smirk on his face. Fine, but just doing a small service to the community doesn't give you the right to be a hero, Bakugo countered. Izuku just nodded as he left his backpack on the floor and began to roll his sleeves up. You're right, but like I said, it was actually for my training. The way I'm going to prove myself to you is… Izuku then rushed towards Bakugo and gave him a punch square on the face, throwing him to the ground with a proud smile like that. What the F you a-hole? The explosive teen complained as he got up, but Izuku had already taken a fighting pose. Fight me, Izuku said, fight me and let me prove to you that I can handle myself, that I can be a hero. Izuku challenged Bakugo, who held his cheek where he had punched him. Fine, you busy. I'll show you once and for all where you belong. Bakugo grinned as he also left his backpack on the floor and got ready, his palms sparking with anticipation. Bakugo was the first one to move as he shot forward with his explosions, beginning with a right hook which Izuku easily dodged. Izuku has already fought Bakugo thousands of times in his last life, and all of those were with a better version, so even when fighting in a younger body he could see the faults in his attacks and counter them. He sent a fist to his stomach, pushing the blonde teen back again before he rushed at him, and before he reached him jumped in the air and sent a kick to his side. Bakugo pushed his hands forward and used his explosions to dodge the kick, but then used the small time that it took Izuku to get back to a good stand to punch him in the face. Izuku bitterly smiled as he took a step back. Just like he remembered, his friend is a natural-born hero as he is able to quickly adapt to the situation and take advantage of it. The two of them continued sending punch after punch. Even when fighting, quirkless Izuku proved to be a big adversary as he knew Bakugo like the back of his own hand, but the same could be said of the blonde boy, both of them quickly thinking on their feet as their fight went on. A few passers-by only sent them a few confused and worried glances but left the two alone. The only people who watched the fight with interest were the vestiges as they silently watched the two kids beat each other to the ground. Nana winced at the bad burns that appeared on Izuku's body every time one of the explosions reached him. She wasn't really happy about the way Izuku had decided to go with it, but she understood that sometimes to get the message to someone with such a dense head you needed to beat it into them a little. She turned to glance at the other two vestiges that watched with far more interest than all the others. All for one and his little brother. They stood side by side looking at the young kids. No, that isn't right, they were looking at themselves, a conversation between two people without words, every punch thrown being an entire sentence filled with emotion, every kick a silent, frustrated scream that could reach the deepest parts of them. First had not told them too much about how his time had been, mostly stuck inside that grey vault, he had said, but he did tell them that he had gotten into one fight with his brother. By their expression she could guess that even with that, there were still a lot of things left unsaid. She let out a sigh. She hated that man so much, but she could understand how much losing your family could be, so she couldn't help the wish for them to try and make things up. Thump! She turned back to the fight and let out a small chuckle as she looked at the two tired teens covered in bruises laying on the sand. Izuku had a black eye, parts of his clothes singed and broken. The times that the heat reached his skin it left a few red patches on his skin, his knuckles bruised and blooded as he looked up at the sky. Bakugo on the other hand had no burns, but his body was black and blue from Izuku's punches and kicks, his nose bleeding and his cheeks swollen, his uniform a mess stained in his and the green-haired kid's blood. For a while both just laid on the sand looking up at the darkening sky, the sun beginning to set in the horizon and the stars beginning to shine brightly in the night sky. Bakugo felt a strange sense of déjà vu wash over him as he looked up at the sky. How long ago was that time? When he fell as a kid, when he was leading the other kids, he had slipped and fallen in a shallow river. The others just watched, and the only person who ran down to try and help him was a small green-haired boy with a face full of worry as he stretched out a small hand. Bakugo slowly stood up, letting a few curse words slip from his mouth as his body ached with every slight movement. Izuku looked at him with not anger, sadness, or the cold glare from before, but awe and a small smile. Of course he would be the first one to get up. It was what Izuku thought. Bakugo had always been an amazing guy. Up. Hey. I said get up, Bakugo said, but his words were not what had confused Izuku but his actions. Bakugo stood in front of Izuku with his hand outstretched towards him to help him get back up from the ground. Both of them just stayed staring at each other until Izuku finally broke into a bright smile as he grabbed his hand. "Thanks, Kaken," Izuku said as he got back on his trembling legs. Bakugo just clicked his tongue as he picked up his backpack from the sand before giving Izuku one final glance, no anger in his eyes. Izuku smiled as he followed with a smile, a silent message of respect between the two of them as they walked home. "Izuku, I can't believe you just came back like this," Himiko said as she pressed a bag of ice against his eye, but even when being berated he couldn't help but laugh. "If Mom saw you like this she would have a heart attack." "I'm sorry, but really it's nothing too bad." He tried to calm her down, but it did the complete opposite as she lightly hit his arm, making him flinch in pain. "Okay, it hurts a little bit." The two continued to talk as Himiko helped with his wounds. Right now, the two of them were alone at home as their mother was out in an interview for her job, and he was really glad that she didn't see him like this because, like his sister said, she would have a heart attack. Suddenly, Izuku's smile fell, yesterday's nightmare and today's message from his older self coming back to his mind along with the other incidents, the stolen quirks pushing his emotions to the brink, stealing Stain's quirk, all of it left a sour taste in his mouth. "Hey sis, can you promise me something?" he quietly asked, but it was more than enough to catch her attention. "Sure, what is it?" she asked as she looked at him. He smiled as he could see the trust in her eyes. Maybe it was selfish of him to ask something so big of someone like her, but he couldn't help the small ball of fear in his chest. "If, for some reason I become a villain, be sure to kill me, all right?" he said with a weak smile. Himiko was shocked, and for good reason. The kindest person she had met, her own brother, had just asked her to kill them. How could she not be shocked? Why does someone who only wishes to help others be so scared of turning evil? She didn't get it, but for the person who always wore a smile, made her days brighter and brought a new light to her life, if there is something her brother was scared of, as her family then. She carefully held Izuku's rough hands in her small soft ones and with a determined expression nodded her head as she silently made a promise in her heart. She'll protect him, no matter what. Izuku gulped down the bottle of water that he had brought, not because he was thirsty but because he was worried about what could happen to his own throat after he began. He looked towards the ocean as it reflected the stars in the sky, the smallest movement because of the wind, and under his boots the clean sand of the beach. Right now it was the middle of the night and he was standing on Takoba Beach getting ready for the next phase of his training. Since his friendships had already begun to grow, the next thing to work on was his alibi to get into UA. Since he decided that stealing the quirk that he wanted would consume too much time and it was still a traumatizing experience to him, he decided for the second best option, which was forcing an awakening on a quirk. "Are you sure this will work?" "Awakening a quirk is not so simple as just training with it," his father said, and for good reason. Quirk awakening is a still strange concept on the world. Even in the future there was still a very little amount of information known about it. The only thing for sure was that it was an evolution that the user's quirk would go through in a stressful situation to keep its user alive. His plan was a little dangerous, but it was also the best he could do right now without putting his life on the line. Now came the other question: what quirk would he use? Because he couldn't just use any quirk for his lie to hold up. Fire manipulation, or famously known as pyrokinesis. It was the perfect lie, the combination of both his mother and father's quirks. People may be confused about it coming so late, but it was easier to explain a lie about that than trying to explain the sudden appearance of a quirk that didn't appear in his family tree. He took a deep breath and he could feel his chest fill with heat, his throat began to shine a bright orange, he felt as if his lungs filled with scorching air similar to that of a desert. And he let it out into the sky. From his mouth a large flame of orange and red shot out, lighting up the night. The flames only lasted a few seconds as they finally died, leaving only the strange feeling of warmth around. The quirk his father used to hide his identity with his mother. Fire breathing. He coughed a little as his throat felt dry and his mouth stuck the taste of ash to his tongue. The drawbacks weren't bad, just annoying. He put a hand to his chest as he felt the warmth that it gave off, as if a small ball of heat had appeared in his chest. After finding it inside AFO, Izuku felt a little confused about why it was there. It wasn't a powerful quirk like the others, and his father could have given it up to one of his nomes. But he didn't. He kept it. Did he grow attached to it? Oh no, that's bringing a lot of confusing feelings. He needs to concentrate back on what's important. He had the quirk, so now he needed to bring the danger into the equation, and what better way than the quirk that could make him explode. He took another deep breath, activating both the fire breathing and one for all at 3%, making his body tremble slightly. 3% was his maximum output without any help from the other strengthening quirks, but it wasn't enough. 4%. His body began to shake even more, and he could feel his muscles begin to clench. 5%. He begins to pant as his body begins to tingle, the green sparks around him making his hair stand up. 6%. He begins to make small likes of fire appear around his mouth as his head is stricken by a headache and his body is hit with a bone-deep pain as if his own body could break like glass. 7%. Izuku pushes through the pain, ignoring all the warnings his own mind gives him as he takes a deep breath that fills his chest with a sharp pain and lets out another breath of fire, this one brighter than the last, before falling to his knees panting for air as his body trembled in pain as if he was being pierced in all sides. It failed. OFA gave the quirk a slight boost but no awakening. He laid down to let his body rest and wiped the sweat around his forehead. He knew that this would take a long time to work, so he didn't feel discouraged, but wow, did it hurt. Okay, once more. Following the beginning of his new training, the days began to blur together for Izuku. With him slowly fixing his relationship with Bakugo, his days became a lot more peaceful and quiet as the other students didn't dare approach him. After one day, Bakugo sat down and silently ate lunch with him. His time at home also became much quieter as his mother now spent more time out because of her work, but he spent most of his time helping his sister since they had decided to put her in online classes until she could go to school with him next year. The two of them took the time to bond even more, and he had even told her about Bakugo, which she had taken a lot worse than he had expected. So let me get this straight, your childhood friend, who you literally treat as if he was your own family, but when he found out you were quirkless he started to bully you, and nobody stopped him, she said, screaming in anger. Why, but we are beginning to fix things, we are talking things out kind of, and we've made a lot of progress and you aren't listening. Izuku stopped as he noticed that her sister began to mutter to herself, saying some things that confused him, like "the moment I see him," but the image made him laugh a little, which caught her attention. Sorry, it's just that seeing you like that made me think that you already look like part of the family, Izuku said, causing her to pout and playfully punch him in the arm before the two began to laugh. When night came, he changed his usual vigilante outings for his training, which had yet to show any progress, but he was confident that it would work, and if it didn't, he still had more than a few backup plans in his sleeves. The disappearance of Remnant was not unnoticed by the people, as cases of random thugs or villains being less and less as the days went by after the Stain incident. This sent many people to their eyes that all he had done was just to get Stain's attention and take him down. Others said that he might have died from the injuries of the fight, but no one could reach a satisfying answer. The most annoyed people by the news were the detective, All Might, and Aizawa, who after meeting Remnant was then told about All for One and One for All, which only gave him a headache but still agreed to help. Remnant had been their only lead to AFO, as they weren't sure if he could still be alive. All they knew was that someone had a connection to him, but the way they acted made no sense to them. If they really were evil, why would they go around taking down villains? It doesn't make sense, Aizawa argued to Toshinori in his skeleton form, who now sat in the detective's office, who was messing with the various papers on the board and a red string. They may be people who tried to oppose him, and the kid might be their personal cleaner who is just getting rid of the trash, Toshinori said. Whenever they talked about this, he always took the darker looks, and this only caused more problems to the trio because Aizawa just couldn't agree with him. Obviously he had dealt with kids who were villains. He never liked those cases, even less now that he had a kid who had been a victim of abuse. What if he is controlling them? Maybe keeping their family as ransom to make sure they follow orders, Aizawa said. He couldn't help trying to defend the kid. His small interaction with them on the phone had left a mark on him. The kid sounded fine. He even joked with him at times, and if he knew his personal phone number the entire time, then he could have asked for help at any time. Aizawa, I know that you want to help the child, but if they are related to that man, then it is already too late for them. All for One is a manipulative bstrd. How do we know that he hasn't already groomed him into the perfect assassin? Toshinori argued back, his expression grim. Aizawa grit his teeth. Maybe his own judgment was clouded since it came down to a child, but he just couldn't help but see his own son Shinsu in that kid, someone who didn't get the help they needed and ended going down a dark path. But what made him the most angry was And you call yourself the symbol of peace when you can't think of anything but getting rid of a child instead of helping them, was what Aizawa said before storming out of the room. And in the blink of an eye, the last year of middle school began for Izuku, but this time he wasn't alone like the other times, as him and Bakugo had finally gotten to speaking terms, even if they were just small talk. The other reason being his sister joining his class, and that sure was a day to remember. And now, before we begin, I have to inform you of a new classmate that will be joining the class, the teacher said with a complex expression on their face as the other students began to whisper amongst themselves, making Izuku smile as he already knew the surprise, but he kept an eye Bakugo as he wanted to see his reaction the most. Please come in and introduce yourself, the teacher said, and the classroom door opened as a girl with green hair and 2 buns walked into the classroom with a mischievous smile. Hello, my name is Midoriya Himiko. It's a pleasure to meet you all. I hope that we can be great friends in the future, she said with a wide smile that showed her fangs as the whole class looked at her in complete surprise before turning back to look at Izuku, who was just smiling. Bakugo seemed to be the most surprised out of everyone when he heard that his friend who he had known his entire life had a sister of the same age who he had never seen before. Izuku held back a laugh as he looked at Bakugo, who looked at him with confusion and surprise, looking for an answer. If he had a stretching quirk, he was sure that his jaw would have hit the floor by now. Himiko just happily walked to her seat in the middle of the classroom. The teacher sighed as they rubbed their eyes. With that out of the way, let's begin class by opening your books at page. The students just followed instructions as they tried to process the reveal in their heads. By the time class ended, the first one to move was Bakugo, who got up and stormed to her seat. Who the hell are you? He simply asked as he glared at her. She calmly looked at him, spiky hair, red eyes, and a bad personality. Yep, just like he said. You must be Kaken, she said with a sickeningly sweet smile which just made him more angry. Don't effing call me that, now answer my question, Fangs, he said, anger clear in his voice. Oh, Fangs he, Izuku did say that you usually give people nicknames, but I at least hoped that they would be good, you know, she said with a smile still on her face as her voice dripped with sarcasm. All the other students couldn't help but watch in awe at the girl that openly challenged and mocked the most feared student in the school. At this point Izuku felt that things could get out of hand. Hey Kaken, let's all just calm down and I will explain everything, he said as he got in between the two, trying to stop a fight from happening, but even he was surprised by the sudden change in his sister's attitude. Well, you better, and I hope it be a effing good explanation, nerd, because you don't just get a sibling out of nowhere, Bakugo said, now glaring at him. Hey, don't call my brother a nerd, you beach, Himiko said, catching the two boys' attention. Himiko, no, Izuku said in surprise at hearing his sister curse for the first time. Oh, you wanna effing go cat eyes? Bakugo said with his hands sparking a little. Kaken, don't encourage her, Izuku reprimanded the other boy. When he thought he could see the two just about to get into a fight, he acted first and grabbed the two of them by the back of their clothes and dragged them outside with ease. The teacher just sighed as they laid their head against their head, already feeling a headache coming in. So, you were recently adopted by the Midoriyas from your abusive family, and since it was in the middle of the school year, they kept you in online classes until this new year started to finally sign you in. Am I missing anything? Bakugo asked as he made a quick resume of what the two siblings had told him. They both shook their heads. In the story they gave him, they had decided to skip the more gruesome details of the story. Okay, but I do have one question. Why the F did you never think of telling us? Bakugo asked. Both of their families were close, and even if they didn't talk about it, both of their mothers were close friends, so he had expected at least his mother to tell him, but it seemed like she was also out of the loop. Well, Izuku was busy with his training and studying to get the time to tell you, and Mom has been really busy with her job, so telling your family probably slipped her mind, Himiko explained, which was mostly correct because she didn't know that Izuku didn't tell him on purpose since he wanted to see his friend's reaction. Oh, don't judge him. If he was going to mess with time, he could have a bit of fun with it now and again. Wait, Auntie Inko is working now. What does she even do? Bakugo asked. She's a lawyer now, Izuku answered to the surprise of his blonde friend. The three of them continued to talk before Bakugo said, You said something about training, right? Izuku nodded, wondering where this was going. Tell me where it is and I'll join you, he said, surprising the two greenettes. Wait, you want to join, really? Izuku asked. After seeing firsthand how much of a mean left you had, I thought that what you are doing can't be that bad, Bakugo said. Wait, if he is joining then I want to join too. His sister said, looking at him expectantly. Well, if the two of you want to join then I won't say no, Izuku said with a smile, happy by the idea of training with them. Their conversation continued without anything interesting coming up again except for the times when Himiko and Bakugo kept butting heads with each other, only confusing Izuku as he tried to stop a fight between them. On the walk home, Izuku couldn't help but ask, "Do you have something against Kaken?" "What? No, what makes you say that?" she innocently asked, giving him a smile. He sighed and patted her head, making her giggle. "It's just a hunch." 10%. Izuku was on the floor writing in pain as he gasped for air but couldn't get anything in. His muscles locked in place, leaving him frozen on the cold sand, his ear ringing, only making the headache he had much worse. The only warmth he felt was the one of the blood that came from his nose, the cold air sending shivers through his body, and the sparks around his body felt like he was being struck by lightning over and over again. His vision, already blurry, began to spin as he could feel his own body shutting down. Just a little more. Just a little. As if a matchstick had been thrown on him, his body suddenly was covered by flames of a deep violet which illuminated the beach, making him look like a human torch. Izuku quickly turned off one for all when he felt the fire burn through his skin as it began to make his own skin fall off, exposing his own bones to the cold night, sending even more jolts of pain through his body. The heat was so powerful that the sand around him began to melt and turn to glass in seconds. Izuku quickly activated all of the healing quirks he had as he kept panting on the ground, his body regenerating the lost flesh back into his body. He closed his eyes as he just listened to the soft sounds of the ocean as he waited for the sudden rush of adrenaline in his body to disappear. The heat that once stayed focused in his chest now spread through his entire body as if it flowed through his veins. He opened his eyes and with a little concentration made a small orange flame appear on his fingers. He had done it. He finally had the quirk the world had refused to give him. Izuku absent-mindedly stared out the window, watching the trees slowly move because of the wind, following the leaves that fell and slowly glided to the floor. The day had been like any other, a fight between heroes and villains on the way to school, a new hero making a debut, someone with a gigantification quirk if he remembered correctly, and then just sitting through class answering whatever questions came at him. But something caught his attention. "So I'll be handing out printouts on your desired life course, but..." The teacher stops with the pile of papers in his hands as he then throws them into the air as he continues, "But all of you just want to be heroes, right?" The students burst into cheers as they all used their quirks, but Izuku just sat there quietly as he clenched his fists. He remembers this. The day it all began. Yes, all of your quirks are all wonderful, but it's against the rules to use them in school." The teacher tried to calm the students, and Izuku looked towards the next person who would speak up. "Sensei, don't lump us in with these extras," Bakugo loudly exclaimed with a grin in his face, getting the entire class attention. "You can't compare me and the Midoriyas to these weak but extras. We are in a whole other ballgame," he proudly stated, and Himiko nodded with a smile. Izuku was a little surprised at the statement as it was different from the one in the past, but that just went to show how much he respected the people he deemed worthy to stand on equal footing with him. The other students were obviously not happy with his words. "Oh yeah, you three are shooting for Yui, correct?" the teacher said, bringing silence to the room as all the other students shut their mouths in surprise, but soon their voices started again with a new tone, much quieter and subdued as to not call their wrath on them. "But isn't that the national level academy? Isn't the entrance exam super difficult? Yaren, will they really accept someone like him? You can't get in with just good grades." Izuku just let out a sigh. They were talking about him. The change from being called Deku to the one who should not be named, as first put it, wasn't bad, but even now they still thought that he had no chance to become a hero. "What was that about, Izuku, you diamond extras?" Bakugo said, his hand igniting, giving his face a much dangerous look. "You got a problem with my brother?" Himiko asked with a smile, but a dangerous glint could be seen in her eyes. The students shuddered as they shook their heads. After the first day of class, Himiko had quickly gotten both the respect and fear of her classmates, since she is one of the only people to talk back to. Bakugo, who not long ago was thought to be the top dog of the school, but not long after he had acknowledged the two twins to be the only people in the school he would come to respect. The other students had tried to get on their good sides, but no one could, all because of one thing, the only thing they have in common. Izuku. Bakugo had begun to fix his relationship with Izuku, and while they were not at the same level they were back when they were kids, he couldn't tolerate those who tried to hurt him. Himiko, on the other hand, after hearing what Izuku had to go through, she had put all of them in her blacklist, but after seeing how much Izuku kept vouching for Bakugo, she reluctantly decided to accept him as a friend. After that, class continued on with no problem. Izuku looked at his desk, which was completely clean, no burn marks or writing like last time, no fight, no ridicules. All of these were small but still big signs to him of the changes he had done. Class finally finished and everyone began to leave. As Izuku began packing his things, Himiko came straight to him since both walked home together, but there was also Bakugo who was waiting for the two of them. He also walked with them but at one point split off for his own home. "Are you coming or not, nerd?" Bakugo asked as he crossed his arms. "There's this new restaurant close to my home that I wanted to check before it closes for the day." "Oh really, what kind of restaurant is it?" Himiko asked. While she didn't entirely like Bakugo, she knew that the two could still have normal conversations. Izuku continued to pack his notebooks while the other two talked until he stopped before grabbing the last one, hero analysis for the future number 13 written in the front. He slowly grabbed it as he remembered what was supposed to happen to it, and the memory seemingly played in front of his eyes. He saw his small self panic as a different Bakugo picked the notebook up and burned it with his quirk as he then threw it out the window as if it was a piece of trash. He could only watch as months of hard work were lost in seconds. Bakugo began walking away, laughing at his demise, leaving him trembling in a mix of anger, sadness, and slight fear. "If you want to be a hero so badly, why don't you just take a swan dive off the roof and pray that you get a quirk in your next life?" Words that were covered in venom and sharp as a knife stabbed at his heart as he tried to say something, only to be shut by the sound of the explosions in his hand that made his skin shiver. "Earth to Izuku, you in there?" Himiko's voice snapped him out of his mind as she waved her hand in front of his face. He must have gotten caught inside his head again. "Are you okay, Izuku? You've been doing that a lot lately," she asked as he finally put the book in and picked up his bag. "Yeah, I'm okay, I just have a lot on my mind lately," he answered, which wasn't a lie. As this day got closer and closer, he couldn't help but keep reminiscing about his past life as events became more and more familiar but also slightly different. Bakugo and Himiko looked like they wanted to say something but held back as they all left the school. They spend their time talking until Bakugo finally splits off their group, leaving the two siblings alone. They continued talking until they reached the tunnel that they always pass to reach home. Izuku turned to look at the manhole as his sister was walking in front of him, and he closed his eyes as he took a deep breath and steeled his nerves for what was to come. The sound of the sludge moving through the holes of the manhole and forming the gross mass that was the villain behind Izuku caught the two greenettes' attention. "What do we have here? You'll make a perfect skin suit for me to hide in, kid." His gross stench breath and his breathy voice sent Izuku into action as he pushed Himiko away as the sludge wrapped around him. The sludge wrapped around Izuku like a snake and blocked any way for him to breathe. The disgusting stench of the saw it had been not too long ago filled his lungs, making him GG. "Izuku!" Himiko screamed as she began to claw at the sludge, only for it to go through her fingers, panic rising in her body as she found her attempts at helping her brother completely useless. The villain began to laugh at the poor girl's panicked expression. "You can't grab a hold of me, I'm amorphous, so stop being a bother." The villain raised a tentacle ready to slam it down on her. Izuku might not have been able to breathe, but he knew that he couldn't continue to play the same script as before. Heat began to spread through his body, the blood in his veins beginning to boil as small flames appeared on the tip of his fingers. He stopped clawing at the sludge and instead shot it upwards towards the villain's face. Most of his body was liquid, meaning that any attack against it would be useless, but two parts of their body had been kept the same, making them a perfect weak point. His hand grabbed one of the villain's eyes, making him scream in pain and weaken his hold on him, but he wasn't finished. The small flames began to grow as they converged around his hand before exploding in a scorching wave of red flames, causing the villain to let out a screech of pain as he jumped away from the two teens. Izuku fell to his knees as he coughed, trying to take a breath of fresh air. Himiko rushed towards him, both worried and surprised at what she had just witnessed. The villain watched in pain and anger as the eye Izuku had been holding fell to the floor as a pile of ash. "You little BS, I'll make you regret that." The mass of sludge then shot forward, raising multiple tentacles at them. Izuku clutched his hand. Since his body didn't have any kind of fire resistance, his own flames caused him various different kinds of burns, and using it again would only make them worse, and at the same time, he knew that this villain was ready to kill the two of them, so if he wanted to survive he would also send a killing blow at them, but he didn't want to do that right in front of his own sister. Thankfully, things wouldn't come down to that as someone else still needed to enter the scene. Have no fear, the manhole that the sludge had come out of suddenly shot up as a muscular figure climbed out of it, his voice as loud and clear as ever bringing everyone's attention to him, his blonde hair shining as if made of gold and his smile exuded an aura of confidence, "For I am here. All Might, the #1 hero." Izuku could barely hold back the smile that grew on his face at seeing the man he had considered a father once again standing before him. The villain stopped his attack out of shock as the hero that he had been running away from finally caught up to him, fear clear as day in his face. All Might took a quick glance of the situation, his eyes sweeping past the two green-haired teens and finally landing on the villain. "It appears that you young ones have been able to handle the situation on your own, and I apologize for having placed you in such danger, but now I'll make up for my mistake." All Might pulled back his fist and both Izuku and the sludge reacted to the movement. Izuku jumped to get a hold of his sister knowing exactly what came next, and the villain, even knowing that it was useless, tried to run away. Texas. Smash. With immense speed, All Might threw his fist forward and with a great scream from the depths of his heart caused an enormous amount of air pressure to rush forward and sent the villain to splatter all over the tunnel. The siblings were not safe from the attack either, even if they weren't the intended target. The amount of strength that the single punch contained was enough to send them flying. Izuku held on tight to his sister as his back hit the wall, taking most of the hit for the two of them. He almost wanted to laugh. Last time he had gone unconscious from that punch, but now he only had a headache. It worked as a good show of how much he had grown. The same thing could not be said about his sister, who seemed to be seconds away from puking. Izuku watched as All Might moved at incredible speeds to pick up the scattered villain into a soda bottle. The speed at which the hero moved surprised Izuku, as he had gotten used to the already retired All Might from the future, and seeing him back in this part of his life was hard for him to get used to. After he was done with the villain, he changed his attention to the two siblings who were finally getting back from the floor, the male helping the female one to stay on her feet while her face was still green. "Ah, young ones, I am glad to see that you are unhurt. Again, I apologize for getting you wrapped up in my mess. I must be off my game today," All Might said as he laughed at his own joke. Izuku just smiled as he tried to ignore the ghostly figure of his father that tried and failed to pull the hair of the hero, as Nana also tried to pull them away. "But thanks to you, I've shut him into this bottle." The blonde hero proudly showed him the bottle of the sludge villain with its one remaining eye floating inside. Izuku tried to speak, but All Might only continued on. "Oh right, wasn't his time up by now? Now I must deliver this perpetrator to the authorities. Next time we meet, it shall be through a TV screen." The words made Izuku's happiness disappear as he saw the hero squat, his hand stretched out by instinct to try and grab the hero before he left, only to close it and let it fall helplessly to his side as the words that started it all rang in his head as if stuck on replay. "Even if I don't have a quirk, can I become a hero like you?" A bitter feeling began to well up in Izuku's stomach as he helplessly watched his bond with the hero come undone, tears prickling the corners of his eyes. With a single jump, All Might had already gone into the sky faster than a rocket, his figure disappearing into the clouds, and Izuku could only watch from the ground. "Bye, never come back," his father said with a smile to the now gone hero, as if he had been the one to scare him away. Nana drifted into view, a sad and concerned look in her eyes as she could understand how Izuku felt. She had seen Toshinori as her own child and the boy had seen him as his father, but now that relationship would never flourish as the one thing that had brought them together, one for all, was taken out of the equation. "Kiddo, are you okay?" she softly asked the greenette, who now looked at the ground with a shadow casted over his eyes. Izuku looked back at his sister, who was finally getting better as her face was less green than before, and he could see that the events that had just happened had already begun to dawn on her. Izuku sighed, a deep sadness in it. He knew that things like this would be hard, that because of his actions and situation the relationships he had would never be the same and that he should prepare himself for those moments but… "Yeah, I'm fine," he quickly said. It's not the truth, but he doesn't want them worrying about him more than they already do. They have much more important things to focus on. She gives him a look that clearly says that she didn't believe him, but all she did was reach out and take his hand. Once again he could feel warmth spread through it and it at least helped keep him together.